And then give to the chairman, you're still chairman, Sherry, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the chairman of the Conservation Commission to call roll call, and then I'll read the agenda. And the planning board has a few things on the agenda before we get to the wetlands part of it. And tonight's discussion is the planning board meeting, so any motions and seconds will be done by planning board members. Deliberations be done by planning board members, but conservation can kick in on that, deliberating the wetlands there. And then any vote will be taken by planning board members. So that being said, I will give our roll call. Scott Self, that is me, I'm here. Richard Lane. Here. Mark Scalera. Here. Brandon Self. Here. Michael York. Here. Victoria Ames.
Here.
And Charles Harbeck, selectman's rep, is not here. Steve Malone, alternate, is not here. Michael Scungio, alternate, is not here. Jane Johnson, alternate, is here. But I can't see her for the selectman's rep because you can't see one for the selectman's rep. So on to the agenda. This evening, we have approval of minutes from November 14th, 2024. There are no public hearings and under discussion and other business. We have Mark Beaudry, I think it is, with Civil Works New England at map 220 lot 5, a use proposal. It's down there. And Wetlands Conservation District proposed amendments and other business as may be required. First of all, there's no public hearings or anything like that, so I don't think we need a regional impact motion. Anybody disagree? Then we don't. So approval of the minutes for November 14th, 2024.
I'll move we approve the minutes. Yes, sir.
Motion by Michael York to approve minutes. We have a second.
Second.
Seconded by Mark.
I have one
Yep, now we're on discussion.
possible correction. On page 2. It starts where Howard states that Arlington paving.
Yep.
And then Andy Hill. The intent of the sentence is that they will remain in their current zone, but I believe he indicated that Hill was agreeable to changing his to residence, and whether or not that should be in there or not.
Well, yeah, you're correct in that. Let's see, Howard states that Arlington paving, Andy Hill, and all purpose storage will remain in their current zone, but all others will be converted to residence or conservation. So she said that, she may have said that, she said it in the first meeting, but when she left the first meeting, it was different. It was that they're all going to be converted to residence. Second meeting, I'm not sure if she said that, but the supporting evidence or paperwork that she presented to the board indicates otherwise, that those will remain in business or be changed to business, actually. That's lot 22.
But Hill showed it was going to residence.
Hill, it shows going, no, Hill, lot 14, Hill.
Yeah.
Goes to business, now goes to residence.
That's when
And lot 22, Base Hill, business going to residence, and there's one more in there, which showed the same thing, so. I don't know if she said it or not, but it's incorrect. So how do you want to do that?
And you just need to delete this, and put a period after residence, is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that that's incorrect, that what she means is that they will all go over to residence district. So I don't know if she said that or not. Does the board think she said it or not? If she said it, then we leave it in the minutes, regardless of what she does.
We can go back to the video too.
I don't think we need to do that. Let's just take it.
These are my minutes, so they're very bad. So I understand. I understand.
I wasn't gonna bring that up.
They're not
Now that
ugly
you mention
minutes.
So. We can just leave it.
I thought she was indicating they would maintain their current use, which, of course, right? And that they would get moved to residential. I think these properties.
That might have been it.
Yeah, okay, that must have been what she was talking about there. So we can either reword it or leave it as it is. It really doesn't make much difference. So, okay. So,
She's speaking on somebody else's behalf, so.
yeah, yeah, okay. And I don't think I had anything else there. Anyone else have anything else? You okay with that, Richard?
Sure.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor and a second to approve the minutes of the 14th. Yep, on November 14th. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, that's out of the way. Now, under discussions, item A is Mark Beaudry with Civil Works New England, map 220 lot 5, use proposal. Is that you? Yep. All right,
I am Mark Beaudry,
Beaudry,
close
thank you.
enough,
Okay,
and okay, so I just want to look here. The want to get this on camera maybe, but somebody will.
No, we just want to see it.
Okay. So, good evening, Chairman, chair people, members of the board, members of the commission. I think it's timely, actually, good that the conservation commission is here also. But let me start with a larger. Yes, I'm with Civil Works New England, and the owners of this property, Stephen and Lonnie Giordano, are actually en route, and they're gonna be here around 6:30, so they asked that I get started, so. A little bit of history real quick, the Giordano's bought this property from I think it was actually at an auction. Back a few years ago, and it's actually at the intersection of Route 12 and Marcy Hill Road. So it's like 14 or so acres. And interestingly, for the Conservation Commission, much of that area, as I'm sure you know, is actually wetland. So there's probably only 4 or 5 acres of wetland on the property, so maybe 9 or 10 acres of upland. And there's one upland area right at the intersection of Marcy Hill and Route 12. And then a lot of upland back in the back part of the property. And this is the towing business right here. So a lot of the properties like behind that is Marcy Hill Road. You start seeing like the houses up this way. So what we're talking about right now is this area right here. That was I think some of the people in town I know have seen this plan before. But what the Giordano's would like to do is to develop that piece of property and generate some revenue, on the property, get established here. And then while we're working on the let's call it phase 2 of the development, which is obviously bigger. Gonna be, more work from a stormwater management standpoint, septic standpoint, septic and on-site, water supply well here, so. Also, because with the larger project, it's gonna need, New Hampshire DES alteration of terrain and, permitting. So we are looking at this smaller development, like it's AOT. So because of the common scheme development kind of approach. So we've been talking with the town. I think we first met with Mike Jasmine and Stefan back in the spring, started talking about the project with the Giordano's were there at that time. Since then, we had some, we've done some soil testing with the property. The wetlands have been, located. We've done quite a bit of work to get to this point, and but at this point, we wanted to come into the planning board and bonuses conservation commission to start getting some feedback from the boards on the project before we go to the getting a full formal submission. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So the plan is to have what we've kind of come up with on the design is a 2,400 square foot, we're calling it a drive-through restaurant, which, would be like a coffee type use or something like that, or whatever. It's really, we keep calling it the coffee shop, but to be frank, there's no any tenants lined up, no franchisees, they really nobody at this point, so. What we were kind of, we did this layout based on the Dunkin' Donuts, to be honest, that we did in East Oak, New Hampshire, and so we similar footprint. We know how the drive-through is gonna work, things like that, and so we've kind of laid it out on that basis without having any discussions with Dunks that I'm aware of. So this is something to kind of get started. So before I forget, what we'd like to do ideally is to get, incorporate feedback we get from the boards and then get this submitted and ideally get an approval from the boards that the geodowners could then go to basically mark it as an approved site plan. Obviously, there would be conditions, and if the planning board, if something changed from the approved plan, obviously we'd have to come back to the various boards and get, amended approvals. I don't have with me the existing conditions plan, but there is an isolated wetland right about here. That would show that would be filled as far as the work goes, and also a little bit of wetland filling in, for the driveway entrance that would be out onto, Route 12, so obviously we need, DOT access permit and everything else for that. But the total wetland disturbance is less than 3,000 square feet, well below, so it's just a minimal kind of impact project. We do have our wetland scientist is gonna be, helping us with ultimately a wetlands finding on this. And, we fully understand what is involved from a permitting standpoint. Speaking of permits, because of the drive-through, we do know that we need a special exception from the ZBA. And another thing that's interesting before I forget, and looks like we're might be talking about it tonight, is we have our septic leach field at this location that fully complies with all the New Hampshire DES setback requirements. It does not, it's not 125 feet from wetlands as presently required in the Wetlands Conservation District. So that's something we would have to, if we move it forward at this time. If the town chooses not to amend that bylaw, that part of the ordinance, then obviously we need relief for that requirement. Now, interestingly, well, this is all wetland, as I mentioned, and we're looking at our septic right over here. We're using this area for stormwater, but all of this is within 125 feet of the wetlands, which you can see that line is the wetlands, the dot dash. So to get something more than 125 feet away, it would have to be built back on the main part of the site up here, with wetland crossings and all kinds of things. I don't know, it just doesn't really seem practical. So that's the direction we can kind of go in, and hopefully we'll be able to get the relief from that if so required. But so yeah, it's parking wise, we have way more parking, I think, than is needed by the zoning ordinance, which I think is, if I recall, one parking space for every 3 seats.
That's correct.
You might have something like maybe 20-25 seats in here, I'm thinking, so you don't need a whole lot of parking. But what we did is lay out parking that based on our experience with similar types of uses. So, but that said, we have we do have stormwater plan that we were thinking about coming before the board last week, but I want to get the stormwater design a little bit further along. But we do have a stormwater basin, wet pond out the back that would meet New Hampshire DOT requirements, I believe, Swanzey. That it looks a little big, but the reason it's broad is because we've got a fairly close to the surface seasonal high water table here, and not a lot of grade change. So we didn't want to put a ton of fill on the property and to have a smaller footprint basin, but what we did instead was have a fairly shallow basin. It's only maybe a couple feet deep, the major pool of it, with not having to fill the site significantly. So we're looking at maybe a floor elevation that's only a foot or two above existing grade out here. In this basin, we work well, meet New Hampshire requirements with with the water table that we're seeing out here and whatnot. So all of this meets, drainage requirements, septic requirements of the state. I think, it complies with all that. We're not asking for any relief variances from Swanzey other than the 125 feet that I talked about and the special exception for the drive-through. Let's see. One thing that because we don't have any particularly specific use or franchise lined up, we're kind of gonna have to speculate for, like, be interested in hearing what the board might have to say about architectural plans. Coming up with trip generation, the septic sizing, things like that, that you can't really nail down until you have a specific use, number of seats, those kinds of things. So it's, the building plans might vary a little bit. Because as you know, all the franchises out there all have their own architectural styles and plans, so. Anyway, it's, we're just looking for feedback at this point, so making sure we're going the right direction. Don't want to waste anybody's time, client's money, et cetera, if, we're going in the wrong direction here, so. It's kind of where we're at. Sir.
So on the larger map, shows a number of other buildings.
Right.
What's the overall intended use of the property?
Yeah. Good question. Now, these are not cast in stone by any means. This was a plan that was prepared by another engineering company. For which I think might have Fieldstone, which I think might have done the plan for another contractor bay facility project in town, if I'm not mistaken. But so what they were showing was a contractor bay facility back here, which we understand is there was some need for it in town. The flex space, this was shown as a flex space also that the Giordano's actually, like I said, wanted to drive through type use here. And then some building like residential units as well. So I think this, when we first looked at this earlier this year, we thought this was maybe a little aggressive when you start thinking about water supply well radiuses, when you start looking about septic loading, all these things. So obviously we need to and Giordano's didn't want to do anything here that might affect the larger project also. So there was some talk earlier on about possibly trying to do maybe a mixed use type here on the old parcel, maybe adding some residential units in there too, but we decided to hold off on all that. It would make a lot requirement to be much larger to meet the density requirements. So we decided, I think the town defines multifamily as 5 units of residential, so obviously we wouldn't be doing that here, so. With a retail use, so. Anyway, we decided to just keep it simple here. Single story, smallish, drive-through type use, and then. Really have all those other uses beyond the back, but. Again, there's wetlands that are located throughout the back of the property as well, that all need to be, kind of accounted for in the design, so. I mean, there's some challenges here for sure.
And I was just more curious when looking at that map. I know you're only talking about that one section right now.
At this point, we're only talking about this. But they don't want to do anything here that impacts their ability to do on the larger project, phase 2. So let's call this phase 1, this would be phase 2. And I don't know, I haven't heard any specific timelines on this yet. Obviously, they want to get this going, pretty soon. So.
So will you be looking for approval for all 3 phases at once, or
No.
approval for phase 1 and then
Yes.
back to the planning board for
Just,
phase
yeah,
2?
absolutely just that, and we may or may not have to do a, because more than one use is allowed on a property, we may or may not subdivide off that parcel. Now, if for some, you know, I don't know, I guess in theory, if for some legal reason, or they end up. You know, deciding they wanted to sell that particular parcel, then they can still do the back, they would. You know, carve that out with a subdivision lot, so. We showed on the plan, I think it was an 1.5 acre parcel, but. Hey, we're not gonna do that on the final plan just yet, that'll probably be removed, that's something I should have mentioned to Adam as well earlier today. That was carried over
Separate
from-
issue anyway.
Yeah.
The subdivision, separate issue anyway.
Yes,
So.
Yep.
So your current setbacks of your septic system, what are they? Do you know what they are?
50 feet off poorly drained soils and 75 feet off very poorly drained.
All right, just flick it back and show me where they are.
So you've got poorly drained soils in here, here. Poorly drained in here, then we get into the very poorly drained soils right here. And over here, so basically that, everything to the south. Is very poorly drained. And these pocketed wetlands that are isolated really are poorly drained. So otherwise, the soil is pretty good, it's a Dwayne, you know. Sandy loam, so we're finding the perk rate here is 10 minutes an inch. Pretty good, actually.
I'm surprised that it is with that
Yeah.
piece over there.
Yeah.
And if you look at the NSDS soil mapping, it's actually mapped as an A soil, believe it or not. So. We
Just
actually
small.
had. Not a whole lot, that was another reason the basin's as big as this, because there's not a lot of the existing runoff off of the property, it's wooded. And it's you know. Really good soils, so obviously there's a lot of peak flow mitigation that has to happen.
So before, what did you mean by not having to build up the property? In regards to the drainage ditch?
To fill it.
Yeah, Billy, you mentioned that. I didn't follow why you mentioned that, what that was.
Yeah, to the if we're filling the site, then the invert of the pipe and everything could have been a little higher, the basin could have been, the berm could have been a little taller. We could have maybe gotten that same necessary storage volume in a smaller footprint instead of spreading it out.
But you didn't want to do that because of just the site work, the filling, or you didn't want to do it because of something else?
A couple of reasons, good questions, I did another project recently that was done in the, you know, we had some filling of the lot to get to, you know, relative to the existing grade, and the developer was like, oh my gosh, this is gonna cost all kinds of money to bring all this fill in, we don't want to do this, lower it back down. So we wanted to keep it relatively the same elevation as the road. So, which we think is a pretty good rule of thumb.
Yeah, it's a cost thing measure.
Yep, it's
Basically,
cost.
it's cost.
Yeah, it's primarily cost, and in this case. With all the wetlands around, you would have to, you're gonna off grade, which might mean more wetland alteration or a lot of retaining walls, which again drives up the cost.
Mhm.
So if you wanted to. You know, obviously we want to try to limit the wetland alteration. So, but this is the leach field, which. Full disclosure was actually based on earlier on a 30-minute in soil excavation. It's actually only 10 as we now know, based on soil testing we just did last Friday. So that footprint can get smaller. So we might be able to get a little further from the wetlands.
Adam, what are you doing over there?
I was watching that.
Yeah.
But maybe I could turn this
So,
out.
have you considered possibly putting the entrance off of Marcy Hill rather than off of Route 12?
Yeah, the actual master plan showed it that way. Good question, but we were trying to keep this more separate from Marcy Hill Road, which is a residential road,
Mhm.
and thinking that this type of use is going to usually get a lot of, you know, drive-by traffic. So people that are, you know, going up and down Route 12 and decide, oh, yeah, let's go grab whatever, coffee, whatever it might be, before we get all the way up to Keene, so. Don't pull in off the road, instead of have them go up Marcy Hill Road and then down into the site.
That's marketing, you wanted them to see easy access.
Yeah,
So, yeah, it's a trade-off there, you're pretty close to Martha Hill intersection there. You got cars coming in and out, pulling out and pulling in, and I don't know about backup for the drive-through or not,
It's a difficult one to come out to.
but it
Marcy Hill.
just might want to consider possibly off of Martha. Yeah,
Okay.
that one's one too, like you said, too, you're
yeah, obviously
at
we
least get
have
them off the
the,
highway.
yeah, we got the stacking that would be needed for, the drive-through lane requirements and everything else, so.
I would say before we get to more discussion, I would say that site plan reviews, those approvals are good for 1 year. With the option to extend another year, so I would want to really be sure that you have some ideas of who you might want to attract to
Okay,
this property.
Okay.
Because that process could take a while.
right,
And before you know it, you could be running out of time,
right,
and then you have to go through the process all over again, which wouldn't be ideal,
right,
so.
understood.
Can I make an observation?
Feel free.
This property, I think, was sold by the town like
Yes.
2 or 3 years ago.
Auction,
Auction, right? So we were asked, the Conservation Commission was asked to take a look at this property before that happened. And so myself and I believe Rachel Elkins walked all over this property. And indeed, the back of it is high and dry, a lot of pines. It could be developed. The front of it is very wet,
yes,
really marginal. We flushed ducks out of there. I mean, that's how wet it was.
This is a Route 12?
Yes.
You're talking about?
The front of it, and then when you get on the other side of Marcy Hill Road, it's obviously there's open water there, it's much,
Right.
even a bigger wetland. Or I should say a more open wetland. So, I mean, that whole front of that property to us just felt super marginal for development, and I think that was what we reported on, but at the backside, and I feel like also the people who own is a towing business there?
Yep.
Is there also a house there? Do they
Yes.
live there too? Because I think this is the property where I recall stopping and talking to those people, and that I think they claimed there was some kind of issue of right of way and who owned that driveway and
the house is right here.
yeah.
By the way, Stephen and Lonnie Giordano just came in.
Hi.
So, Lonnie, Stephen.
Sorry,
Sorry,
All
what
right.
was the second name? Stephen and,
Stephen and Lonnie?
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 Thank you.
So, and here's the towing business right here. The question was this right away right here,
Mhm.
which would be used as another means of access into the back of the property for sure.
And they seem to feel like there might have been some kind of issue as to whether that was theirs or if there was a right of way, like, I don't know if you're gonna find some gnarly issues there or not.
That will have to be obviously worked out for the larger phase 2 project, but we are confident that the Giordano's have, access via that to and it's not only right away, it's actually a ownership land out to Route 12 there. So our survey.
Go to the registry of deeds and find out, show up.
Oh, yeah. Well, we've got, the boundary survey and everything else has been done, so, yeah, obviously that would be definitely confirmed. Mr. Chairman, can you, for Steve Lonnie's benefit, will you repeat that this time we have a meeting tonight after us, but about the thinking about going out to Marcy Hill Road instead of Route 12?
Yeah, the question was, have you considered on that portion that phase 1, I guess you're calling it, phase 1, to put the entrance to the drive-through, whatever it's going to be, off of Marcy Hill rather than Route 12? One reason being it's pretty close to where Marcy Hill comes out there. And the other reason being may or may not traffic backing up in there at high traffic volumes there. But that was one of the questions. I know your leach field is there, but it's possible that your leach field may be smaller now because of the actual drainage data that you have, actually perk test data that you have now. So that was one of the questions there about that. And I don't know, I think some of the other board members might agree with that. Anybody agree with that? No?
I agree with that too.
Okay, it's good to know now because looks like a lot of the board members are agreeing with that.
The pleasure of the board, as long as it fits the design, we have no issue with it.
Victoria,
Doesn't the state have some, it's a state highway, so.
they may not give them the curb cut, we don't know this.
Exactly,
Yeah,
yeah.
but still, it's a planning board thing here, this is design review, nothing we say or you say or held in really, held to, actually.
I just thought of another question, actually. With the DOT permit would be needed for this layout, with the release that would be needed for the 125 foot to wetlands. The drive-through special exception. Does the planning board typically require those permits be obtained before we come to you for site plan approval, or would it be conditional?
They can be conditional, you can come to the planning board without those in hand, but obviously you cannot develop it without those in hand.
Of course. Okay.
So the other question I asked you before about that, the setbacks on that current leach field, the way you have it designed now, you said 50 feet and maybe
So, maybe 75.
75. So where is that? And you know, 50 feet to which side, 75 to which side, you know, where they're.
So what I was saying was, these are the very poorly drained, so you have to be 75 feet from those.
And you are or you weren't?
Oh, we are,
I'm thinking you said you were, yeah.
we are. And then 50 feet from poorly drained, which would be right here, that's 50 feet right there, so clearly we are way more than 75 feet.
You're within that, all right.
We comply with New Hampshire DES requirements.
Okay,
Absolutely.
clears that up, thank you.
Yep, and this is the wetland that's very wet. So we are way more than 75 feet from that, but the little isolated wetlands. Those are the poorly drained ones, those are the ones that were 50 feet up.
And could you tell me how far the building is set back from what's currently delineated as the wetlands in the back there? I guess that's where you're
Back here.
No, down where they said the
Very
yeah,
well.
somewhere in there, yeah.
Yeah, it's about 40 feet off the wetland.
And the side, maybe about the same or a little less on this.
Yeah, to the back, we're 55 feet off the poorly drained,
Okay.
about, again, 55 feet, so, yep.
And if you did put that curb cut off of Route 12, said you have to fill in there, I guess, because that, you said that's pretty wet
Yeah,
out there.
actually, you can see that finger of wetland right there, a little bit of wetland filling right there. But this is a fairly, it's a road side area, it's culvert there right now. So it's kind of not. So when I mentioned the other wetland alteration was the, just a little isolated wetland right there.
Jay?
Well, I know it's not contiguous, but how far is the leach field from the wetland on the other side of Hospital Road?
Yeah, assume that it's, where the culvert starts. We're about, looks like about 90 feet off of that wetland.
And when
So,
you
yeah,
did,
you need, yes,
it's the same.
Yep.
You said, well, when you dug your soil test pits, I know we're in a drought right now, how far down did you find water?
I did say it was closest about 10 inches in place, 10, 12 inches, 16, I think. It was, but the test pits that had closest to the surface was about 10 inches. Which is not surprising how, frankly, how wet the soils are. Absolutely, we're not denying that, but we do, so it is a mounded system that we would have to pump to. So, which is pretty common, actually.
So the leach field is, and that's the section that's right in the adjacent to Marcy Hill Road. Now, question about, you mentioned that you were considering having what felt like maybe excessive parking, given, I know you don't really know exactly what you'd be.
Right.
But if there was less excess to the parking, could you better meet some of the setback requirements that we have?
We put the meaning for the septic.
Well, I'm thinking the leach field for starters, but any encroachments into, you say that you would be asking for relief, but some of the encroachments to what?
If we, if we get rid of, if we deleted some of the parking, we might be looking at removing some along this road. Which would, but we would be keeping the setback roughly where it is, maybe slide it a little bit this way, but we're interested in staying off this. Very poorly drained soils, as much as we could, but we might be able to pull it this way a little bit to. Kind of split the difference between this wetland and this wetland a little bit, but anyway. Yeah, we don't wanna have not enough parking. And, especially not knowing who the specific, tenant's gonna be at this point.
And you said the wells, you had your 75-foot well
Yeah.
in the corner, or left-hand corner, did you say that radius was over there?
Yeah, it's, we were thinking it's probably gonna be down here, or maybe even in here.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll stay easily 75 feet off the subject.
If you were coming in off of Marcy Hill, would you be coming in to the west side of your field, leach field? And if so, could you move that closer to Route 12?
It is, we do have this wetland right here, so we have to stay 50 feet off that. So we can't slide it too much, maybe about, 15 feet this way. So now the driveway would be coming in towards the back of the site. I'd be inclined, but we have 50-foot setback requirement here too, so. We're gonna have to kind of figure that out. So I'm guessing, we'd probably. Shorten up this way and come in and be this way, but so you're coming in towards the front of the store instead of coming into the back. So I don't know, we gotta go there.
Procedural question for the chair. How is relief from setback requirements granted? Who does that? What's the process for that?
Variance, is a ZVA
ZBA
variance,
variance.
and that's right up to their criteria. So.
And the drive-through special exception is with CDA also, so we go in for both at the same time.
And you're pretty committed to a drive-through there? So you're committed to a drive-through there? Or you don't know yet, you're just still weighing?
How can I say this?
I don't know.
What would benefit the town would benefit us. So we're looking to make it the best use possible.
You're willing to work with the town, is what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And but we have to make it viable for a tenant, so they can have a viable business.
I think maybe the order is throwing me off a little bit. Doing the site plan before a tenant is. I don't know if I would advise it necessarily, because. I don't know if do you guys know how they might alter the structure, the parking, just the layout? You could modify it after the fact, but I just don't know why you would really want to do that.
What Lonnie just said was that. They would market this is the site plan, and you gotta live with it, so.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe the building might change slightly if they've got their own architecture, but we would go with the site plan.
Okay. Yes, not my call, so just a note.
And again, this layout was, we based on, what we've been seeing, this type of use. Want for parking.
We have to have landscaping.
Yeah, landscaping would have to go.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Landscaping, lighting, all that would have to be addressed.
Anybody else have anything on this?
Can I ask?
Jane? Yeah.
Well, look, listening to this, there are drive-throughs now that don't offer inside seating, and with the lack of space you have, I would think you might want to pursue that. If you're thinking somebody would just drive through for a drink or, a coffee or a cold drink or something on their way somewhere. Because obviously it's not a destination. So that would cut down on your parking and space that you need.
We find that it is a destination, but for most of the traffic is drive-by. So that are already on the highway, so you might see only maybe 50% of the trip generation here is being added by the use of the roadway. Because, you know, the majority of the traffic is already on the roadway typically, so you're right. But it's, I think I mentioned to you earlier that we based the site design on a Dunkin' Donuts we did in Dover, New Hampshire, that had, believe it or not, this was only a couple of years ago, that had 26 seats inside. So, and they wanted 20 parking spaces. So it's a destination for people getting together after another meeting, let's go get a coffee or whatever, and next thing you know, you got, you know, 4 or 5 people sitting there drinking, you know, sitting there having a coffee. So, and each one had their own car, so.
I was thinking of the one between here and Hillsborough. I think that it's certainly not a thing of beauty, but it's just like, do you know the one, it's a Dunkin' Donuts. And you just drive in one end and out the other.
That is,
Not a great hospitality.
whenever I drive by that, I'm like, why? It's
What
like
an
middle of
ugly
nowhere.
thing.
I can tell you that I used to do more work with Dunks. And the franchise owners are required to build out so many stores to keep their franchise. So sometimes you see them popping up in crazy places that make no sense, other than the franchise can say, I get it. So I don't know what else to say. But yes, the one in Hillsborough is unique.
Anybody else?
Yes, my only comment is this particular section of that lot, I see lots of challenges between the wetlands, between the variances that you need. And I think we really need to make sure you do a deep dive into each of those to make sure it's viable.
Yes.
Part of the reason he's here.
Can I take a straw poll? of
As to
the-
what?
And of the board members to see how receptive you all might be to granting relief from the. Or supporting, I know it's the ZBA thing, relief from the 125 foot.
No, you
Yeah.
won't, you won't get that from this group. So you can get a general consensus as to what we're saying, but that's about as far.
Got it.
We have to be separate from the CPA, they do their thing, we do ours.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
I'm obviously, I'm not gonna give you my opinion ahead of time.
Okay, fair enough. I
So-
don't ask.
Pretty much what you're hearing from the board, I think, is that a lot of them would prefer maybe your entrance to be in Marcy Hill Road rather than Route 12, as it could be, and obviously you're gonna check with the state anyway. And you know, as far as the septic system goes, move around if that will fit in there like that. Anything else from the board or Conservation Commission? Have to give them for their design review. It's non-binding, so.
Right.
So I guess basically that's it, you know, if what you want will fit on the property with our regulations, then certainly go ahead with it, whether you have parking or not parking there, you know, whatever fits, whatever you're gonna do there.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a bit of a risk, maybe not going in there without knowing what's going in there, because you may be back here before the board, but that doesn't mean that you won't get it, you know?
Yep.
The board, listen to you.
Okay. Understood. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. So that brings us to Wetlands Conservation District, proposed amendments. Did you? So we had a lot of stuff in our packet that. You're right.
Yeah, we didn't, I don't usually do roll call per se, but I think, Jane, are you sitting in for the planning board right now?
Am I?
You're not seated, no,
You're not
an
seated?
alternate on the planning board, but you're not. seated.
She's our alternate too, so I could seat her for someone missing. Yeah, I can
Do
seat
that.
you for Bob Goodrich,
Oh, okay.
Nice.
right? So I think we're.
Can I be split down the middle?
Mark, can you pull another chair?
Put my legs up.
No, Mark will resume seated for the planning board.
I think we're only missing 2 members and 1 alternate tonight. So.
Okay, and Richard reminded me, you need to do your roll call as to who's here for the minutes, although I'm sure she has it.
I have it on.
You have it? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Ben.
What are we gonna do without you?
Can we though go around and introduce ourselves just so we all know each
Sure.
other again?
Yeah,
That'd
we
be
can.
helpful.
I'm Scott Self, Chairman of the Planning Board.
Blaine, Mike York.
Brand itself.
Big board,
Bonnie Hart, Victoria Ames.
Bud Windsor.
Mark Square.
Sherry Domina.
I'm Jane.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you. So I had hoped to project just one slide on the projector tonight, but we can't do that, so. But I think hopefully you've all seen or had opportunity to look at, or at least skim over the, two documents that we sent out sort of, from Moosewood this
The
year.
study,
Yeah, so the review of the ordinances, the town's natural resource ordinances, as well as the wetlands evaluation summary. It's not the full report yet, but it's the summary report, which gives the meat of it.
There were two though, Adam, you gave us two, was one of them, were they both summary? No, one was summary, what was the other?
The
one?
wetlands evaluation was the summary. The other one was the final report where it was the review of the,
It was a
natural
draft
resource.
Final resource report, draft final report, is that what that was, Adam?
Yeah, I'm pulling up. Now.
Yeah, I think that's what it was, okay, that was a lot, that was free, right? They did that for free?
no, they did not do that for free. Came out of our budget though.
So they haven't finalized that draft, right?
No, I think we just got, I think November 12th, he gave us what seems to be the final draft, but it probably still says draft on it.
he still wants to be paid.
Okay, so what we read was not the final.
I think it was pretty darn close to the final draft.
Oh, okay,
It won't change much.
okay,
Yeah.
thanks, go ahead.
So I just have a few comments to kind of put things in context, I think, before we start talking about the amendment to the conservation district. And for those people who are a little newer. So you all asked us a year ago why there was 125-foot wetland setback for septic systems, and could that be amended? Could that be changed? And we said, well, we're not really sure why that exists. It existed since the 1980s, but we felt like we needed more information about the town's wetlands, about how our ordinances were or were not impacting wetlands in town. So we hired Moosewood Ecological, I think in 2023, like a year ago, to do a review of our natural resource ordinances and regulations, and also to do the wetlands evaluation. And all these things were going to sort of fold into a new open space plan, which was last done in 2004. So the wetlands evaluation was done to sort of tell us which wetlands in town were most important and what functions and values they were offering us, as well as what kinds of stresses that we've been putting on them in town. So when I read through, and when you all read through the review of the land use planning documents, a lot of their recommendations ended up centering around wetlands, floodplains, groundwater, the aquifer, things like that. So there were, I've got a list of like 10 things that had to do with everything from reconsidering allowed uses in the wetlands district to adoption of land use regulations in flood prone areas, thinking more about how things are going to change with climate change, and the adoption of groundwater or aquifer protection. So there was a pretty wide range of recommendations they came up with. But backing up a little bit, I think it's important to think about why we protect wetlands in town. Why do we not tell people, go ahead and fill that in and build a shopping mall or a house on it? We've kind of learned that in the last century that when you do that, you have all kinds of problems. You have flooding problems, you can mess with your groundwater, you lose your birds and your fish and your insects. There's a reason that the USDA helps pay farmers not to plow up the prairie potholes, because suddenly the duck hunters were really upset there were no more ducks. When you remove the plants from your lake shore, your shoreline can erode, or maybe your neighbor's shoreline can erode. So there's a lot of reasons we have these wetlands rules in place. I think, so the wetlands evaluation that we completed this fall followed a standardized method and looked at several functions and values of our wetlands. So those were ecological integrity, meaning like how intact is this wetland? How much has it been impacted? Does it have all its parts and pieces still there? what's the wildlife, fish and aquatic life habitat? What's the flood storage capacity of the wetland? What's the groundwater recharge value? Sediment trapping, nutrient trapping and retention, shoreline anchoring, those were all the different things that they looked at. And then they cross-referenced those with 4 additional functions, which were scenic equality, educational potential, and wetlands-based recreation. And then they had an additional category called noteworthiness, which examined other things like critical habitat, rare features, unique features, and landscape level conservation planning efforts. So was it something that was mentioned in a regional conservation plan or a statewide plan or even a local plan? So they identified 374 wetlands in town that represent everything from wooded wetlands, like we were just talking about there off Marcy Hill Road, marshes, swamps, peatlands, beaver ponds, lake shores, including Wilson Pond and Swanzey Lake, and vernal pools. They cover approximately 2,824 acres of Swanzey and average about 7.5 acres in size and range from like 1/100 of an acre up to 371 acres. So for the comparative evaluation, they only looked at wetlands 2 acres and larger. So that narrowed it down to about 117 wetlands covering a little over 2,500 acres. And the average size of those wetlands was 22 acres. So this slide that Adam has on the, I think it's like page 23 of the report, shows the wetlands ranked in the top 10% for each category. And there's a lot of overlap amongst categories. So these wetlands in the top 10% especially play a significant role in the groundwater recharge and drinking water quality, flood control, wildlife habitat, etc. But Moosewood noted that the functions of many of our wetlands in town, certainly not all of them, but there's a number of them that have been compromised due to the fact that we have allowed development up to the very edge of the wetlands, which has impacted their functioning. So we're learning that healthy intact wetlands require healthy intact buffers. So why are buffers and naturally vegetated buffers, not just a lawn or gravel? Why is that important? We did find one resource called Buffer Options for the Bay, which was created for New Hampshire's Great Bay Area that lists several buffer widths and how they protect water quality. So I think that's just, it's interesting to know why a buffer makes a difference and how big. So they realized that a buffer of 30 feet can impact water temperature. So if you think about a place like, we've been looking a lot at all-purpose storage on Base Hill Road, where they've paved right to the edge of the wetland. If you have, you know, a rainstorm in the summertime and all that hot pavement and that water's running off of that hot pavement into the brook or into the wetland, that can impact fish, frog eggs, aquatic insects, things like that. So a buffer of 30 feet can cool that, can really help that. A buffer of 98 feet can remove phosphorus and other pollutants from reaching the water and protect habitat for aquatic macroinvertebrates. So think about the insects that are living there that, you know, are the reason we have fish. Think like dragonflies emerging from the pond. A buffer of 164 feet can reduce runoff and stabilize a channel bank like along the Ashwellet. And a buffer of 330 feet provides undisturbed habitat for terrestrial wildlife that uses a wetland. So given what we've learned, our proposed new ordinance suggests a couple of big changes, and I'll just hit the highlights before we get into the nitty-gritty. We're asking that the Wetland Conservation District include an upland buffer of 75 feet from normal wetlands and 100 feet from wetlands that we may designate as prime locally. This tiered system is in use in Fitzwilliam, for one example, and I also recently just looked at Wolfborough's ordinance, which is pretty similar. Number 2, the buffer will also become a setback for development of any sort. And number 3, the buffers really ought to be naturally vegetated. Again, not a mowed lawn, not a gravel parking lot. This also, so those are the major changes that we're suggesting. We're also compromising in several ways. We remove the 125-foot septic setback. We would also suggest that wetlands excluding open water may be used to satisfy minimum lot and setback requirements, which is not the case right now. And there are also areas that are deliberately exempted from the ordinance, and that includes currently used and man-made ditches, swales, basins, farm ponds, fire ponds, cisterns, things like that. So I just remembering when that Weber Hill Road project had to come to us because of a ditch in the road. That wouldn't happen anymore. So we have a number of things. Some of these things on here, I think I had highlighted on one of the copies because we had questions and we wanted to go over some things with you, but there are also a couple of big questions to think about. One is how we decide to designate any prime wetlands. I would like to get, more input, feedback from the town. We have this matrix that Moosewood did with all these X's filled in. And, do we weight all these things equally? Is flood protection more important than sediment trapping, more important than scenic value? What do people think? So that's one question. Another question is, do we really need 3 different overlays for wetland, shoreland, and floodplains? Fitzwilliam doesn't have that, for instance. Might it be simpler to eventually combine all that into one overlay? So we get right into it.
So we're starting from the beginning. I suppose on our wetlands conservation district, section 7. I think that's what we're talking about here. And I think we all have a copy of it in the packet. So let's see, in the first part of it, in the purpose part of it, nothing changes except for, I'll read through it. It says by the authority granted in New Hampshire RSA 674:16-17 and 20. And in the interest of public health, safety, and general welfare, the Swanzey Wetlands Conservation District is hereby enacted to regulate the uses on, and they've added in, and adjacent to those lands defined as wetlands. So that's the addition there. And we've added that in, let's see, to prevent the development of structures and land uses on, and then again added in, and adjacent to wetlands, which would contribute to the pollution of surface and groundwater. So everything is in there except for the and adjacent to.
So,
Yeah.
just a quick question, procedurally.
Yep.
Each of we're talking about zoning amendments. right?
Correct, yeah.
So each change could conceivably be a zoning amendment in the same way that when we talk about manufacturing uses, that would be with all the
Yes,
ripple effects.
yes.
Okay.
So you'd have,
So we should, as we're going through this, we should be thinking about what are the most important changes, because we can't do them all, right? It'd be like 50.
Are you talking about going to warrant? Like you'd have to
That's
have
right.
each thing be a
Yeah.
different thing on the warrant?
Each section specifically, so for instance, the warrant article, so this is section 7 of the zoning. Sorry, this is section 7 of the zoning ordinance, so the amendment could read something like amend section 7, article A to read blank. So article A would be one warrant article. Article B would be another warrant article, but it's gonna be pretty long, so it might have to be split up into 2. It just depends on how many changes, and there are a lot of changes.
it might have to be split. The attorneys might make you split it up to article A1, article A1A, and A1B, all the way down like that.
It's gonna be a lot of potential amendments.
Yeah.
So
So some of these things might not be critical, or it might not change the meaning of the ordinance if we add a word or two, is that what you're saying?
No, we're saying that if you add a word or two, it has to be
it's a warrant article.
on the
Right, no, I
warrant.
understand that, but I'm saying that, if you think that these 2 or 3 words we're adding in here don't change the meaning enough to warrant being there and having their own warrant article, that's.
Yeah, that's,
Which is why I wanted everybody to think about a priority list, because we are gonna need a priority list while we're going through this, because we are not gonna be able to do all of this in 1 year with the other amendments we have proposed.
That's what we're taking over, seriously.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
Most clarity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Under A. in thinking about Base Hill Road and what they wanted to do there or want to do there. Would you also want to add the statement of natural evaporation of groundwater? With that as something that could not be put in, meaning that they wanted to put down hot top over that whole area, which that whole slant is a natural runoff from the hill. Groundwater coming through there, that field helps natural evaporation before it gets down to the wetland. If you cover that, then you've lost that and you're going to increase the amount that's going to be flowing in there.
That's one of the reasons why the buffer. Like, we want a buffer.
Okay,
So
or up,
vegetative buffer of whatever distance is deemed appropriate here. This is one of the things we're talking about today.
But that would probably be considered a primary wetlands, probably 100-foot natural buffer.
and I can't recall what the distance was from the back.
They're probably right to that wetland.
So I know what's existing there, but I'm talking what is about proposed, how, what the distance was from the backside of that eastern building to the edge of the wetland.
Yeah, minimal, very minimal,
On the proposed one or the actual?
both, yeah.
Well, if you use evaporation as a criteria, you kind of have to have a study to back it up as the setbacks do, or buffer areas do, to back it up. I mean, you have to state how much or how many acres or what it would be for evaporation, and that would, I don't know if that would apply too well. I mean, that could encompass a lot of land. As far as if you use evaporation as a criteria. Okay,
Just the
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you brought it up before when we were in the site plan. But yeah. So,
There's more than evaporation going on in that 100 feet buffer,
Right.
evaporation, it's also organisms that benefit from being near the wetland.
It's filtering, it's.
Filtering of the water in that soil. Back.
so let's see. So the addition then purpose would be an adjacent to down all of those. Are they important enough to warrant a separate warrant article for each one of those? That's what we're looking. I think that's what and wants us to go down through to see whether we're gonna prioritize those or not.
Yeah, one. Yeah, so section
Right.
7, Article A, number 1, it adds and adjacent to, A adds the same thing.
Yep,
B adds and damage to, and then D adds and adjacent to. We could probably do an article that states changes section A 1, and then we go to A and D, where that changes the same language, and then another warrant article for and damage to. But it's tough when you change. Yeah, it's like two.
it gets into it.
It
Yeah,
gets into
legally,
it, yeah,
gets into
it
it.
gets into it. I'd have to have a meeting with Cordell, I think, on.
You
these
would.
changes, yeah.
Because it's got to be specific. The voters need to know exactly what they're voting on, and it can't be ambiguous, saying, well, this one is adding that,
Yeah.
that one is adding.
I think if you go to like B number 1, it really lays it out. And maybe that would just
Mhm.
override any questions about A1 through, or A through E.
So B number 1 lays it out in what regard? What are we?
Saying what the Wetlands Conservation District. It defines what the Wetlands Conservation District is as also including these upland buffers.
Okay, so we're moving down to that. We're in A.
I know, I'm just saying,
you're saying
Mark
that
just,
takes
Mark
care
just
of it.
pointed out that
Right.
if this may take care of the things above it and sort of negate the need for it.
Mhm.
I do think the language changes in A are important though, and they do need to be reflected at some point. Especially if you guys want those adjacent uses captured.
But A is purpose and B is definition.
Mhm.
And it seems the district boundaries, and so here the boundary includes land adjacent to, so it sort of includes the idea.
The problem is that the language needs to be consistent throughout the entire section. I get what you're saying, and you're probably right. but eventually we want that consistent language.
Eventually, but
Eventually, yeah,
maybe not this time around.
Yeah, just
yeah,
if we're gonna prioritize it, I think B1 is
yes,
more important.
I agree.
So are we still in A or are we in B? In A, we're talking about the adjacent, it does, one has something to do with the other, as Jay pointed out. I don't know if Margaret has pointed that out, one of you guys did. So we could go down to district boundaries and take a look at that. And Swanzey Wetlands Conservation District is defined as those areas of the town that are inundated or saturated by surface water or groundwater at a frequency and duration sufficient to support, and that under normal conditions does support a prevalence of vegetation typically adapted for life in saturated soil conditions. And I just might point out that is word for word from the RSA's. So that's where that definition came from. And it says as defined in RSA 482, A, semicolon 2, 10. And then it adds that in there, and as it may be amended. We do that sometimes. Then any uplands, non-wetlands, these are additions, as we can see. Within 75 feet of all wetlands and within 100 feet of all prime wetlands, if the site's vegetation has been cleared, the presence of hydronic, it's supposed to be hydronic, I thought, but hydric soil shall be evidence of a wetland. And what we have in there, the Wetlands Conservation District, is sometimes referred to herein as, and that would be changed to the WCD. So that gets into setbacks. Personally, I think the setbacks take a lot from someone's property. I mean, that's my opinion of it. A person who has wetlands on their property, they pay the same amount of taxes on those wetlands that they can do nothing with, that they do on the property that they can develop. Same right across the board, you pay taxes on the whole thing. So if you're gonna take 75 or 100 feet more of their good land from a property that's paying those taxes, you're taking quite a bit, in my opinion, from the property owner, what they can do with it. So that's why I think the 75 feet is too much. And 100 feet, I think is too much. And if we do that, if we do the 75 and 100, we would have to define those prime wetlands first. And it would have to go to town meeting to vote on what those prime wetlands were before we could enact that anyway. So this time around, unless we got a list together real quick, we wouldn't be able to put the 100 in my opinion, because it would relate to nothing. We'd have nothing defined as in prime wetlands.
So Sharon, where do we stand on that list? It says list to come.
Well, it's something that I think we may need more time to develop that list. I would agree that that part with the 100-foot setback, we might not be ready for yet, because I would like to get
There's a
more
process,
input on
there's a
that.
procedure and a process you have
Yeah.
to go through, and it has to be delineated, and then the owners have to be brought in, and I think it might do planning board or conservation commission or both, whatever it is. Owners have to be brought in, discuss that they understand what's going on
Yeah.
there. And
But we're
then-
not talking about state designation as a prime wetland. We're talking
No.
about local designation.
Exactly,
as a prime
that's
wetland.
why it's under local control, that's why the town votes on it after that's been decided.
Procedurally, how would that go on a warrant?
As far as how, the
Yeah.
designation of prime wetlands,
How would we present a warrant article which says these wetlands are designated as prime?
pretty much it would go on something like that. It would have to lay out what the properties were by probably tax map and lot number. But other than that, I would think it could go on as one warrant article. What do you think, Adam?
Yes, probably. It would be large.
Be a lot of-
It would be a large one, yeah. Richard,
I think it was about a year and a half ago. Property down Route 12. Individual came in and they were asking us to adjust the zoning or doing something about setbacks. Because their property, excuse me, was to the east side of the wetland going down there where the car dealerships are.
Yeah.
And we made a decision with that as to what we could allow them to do to, for tax purposes. I'm sorry, I'm being really fuzzy on this, but I know we decided something, with the board.
it wouldn't have been tax purposes, not on.
Well, not
on
only
the-
a tax, but, I think he may have wanted to build something
Mhm.
and it was going to encroach in the setback. but it was like 125 feet. In which case he was going to be in the wetland. And we made an adjustment to that, or
I don't know, without a variance, because it's stated in the zoning ordinance. Jane, did you say you remember that?
I think I remember he was trying to remodel where his restrooms were. And he felt that he had to he was set back too far from Route 12. And behind him, he has a wetland. Maybe that's a different case, but I remember that one. It was the guy that has the ice cream down here. I can't think of the name of it.
This is,
details in that, but
so what are you getting at though?
what I'm getting at is that I'd like to see us be consistent is to what we're going to
Sequel.
or have as a proposal. If we're allowing through an exception to be 75 feet from a wetland in certain instances, and we've decided that that was safe, then why are we going to continue 100 or 150?
Well, we wouldn't be making an exception there. It would be in the zoning ordinance that it's allowed 75 feet to a wetland and 100 feet to a prime wetland, and then these areas are designated as prime wetlands. So those are, the planning board would not be able to distinguish between the two. It would be in the ordinance as to what it was. We wouldn't do, the zoning board could do it, but we can't do it. And Jay, you have
I'm
something?
saying, I don't think the planning board would ever allow somebody to violate the ordinance.
We
You
can't.
would have to go to the zoning board, and I've only seen one zoning board case in the last 2 years for something that's close, that's within 125%.
Yeah, septic system. Yeah, okay, so we're getting back to setbacks on adjacent land. So this proposal that was just in front of us here. Take that, for instance, if we had 75 feet on that one, I don't think you could develop too much of that property there. No, it pretty much takes it away from them. I mean,
Well, it's just not the front of it, the whole back of it would still be developable, not the front.
the very back, but that piece is right on the front there, yeah, but it would take it away. I mean, you're taking a person's property by doing stuff, in my opinion, by doing stuff like that.
So I have a question, and I'm not clear about this. My understanding is that in New Hampshire, the water is the water of the people, right? It's like, I don't own the water what's in my land, it's the state's water. Essentially, is that true?
And might be 10 acres or more.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of Great Ponds or
Yeah, I
something.
think you're talking
No,
about,
I'm just thinking,
Natural bond.
what's the underlying thinking behind protecting water resources? Which wetlands are water resources, right?
But yes, it's a community resource.
So the idea is maybe there's some water on his land, but it's not his water, you know what I mean?
Right.
So
It's all
it's
connected.
the community's water, and that's the argument, I think, that we have an obligation to everybody who is affected by that water, the quality of that water, to make sure that the water, the quality remains high.
Yes.
That's why we're doing stuff in the first place.
Yes, and the science is starting to show that if you don't have adequate buffers around your wetlands, the wetlands begin to lose their function. So, you know, you can't have great wildlife habitat if you've got somebody built right to the edge of a wetland and they're shining their lights in there and their runoff's going in there, and you know, you're losing a number of functions when that happens. And so if you looked at some of the diagrams in the wetlands evaluation, he showed areas of town where there are adequate buffers around the wetlands and the wetlands are considered very high functioning, versus other areas of town where some of the wetlands have become compromised because there's too much development nearby, or maybe somebody's mowing a field right up to the edge of it, or whatever the case may be. But it's lost some of its flood storage capacity, it's lost some of its wildlife habitat, it's lost some of its ability to hold the shoreline or filter the nutrients that are coming in. So all those things that I just mentioned, like flood storage and nutrient filtering, are things that if you destroy that in your town, you have to build a water treatment plant to compensate for some of that stuff. It's providing ecosystem services that are free. And you'd have to make that up if you lost that completely.
And it's also affecting the use and value of the property that's adjacent to that wetland or that stream.
Sure.
And I have pretty direct personal experience with this because I have a lot of it that's bounded by the South Branch. And historically, it has been grazed right up to the edge. Historically, this is a huge area that it's an area that absorbs a lot of floodwater. The 1,000-year flood that we get. And I know that what happens on my land gets radically worsened with every big flood because of what's happened upstream of my land. And I know that my land is also contributing to the degradation because it's been grazed right up to the edge. So, it's a community problem. So I hesitate, I don't feel comfortable saying that I'm taking away somebody's, property rights or, the value of your property if it's a resource that we all share. I have to disagree with you on it.
I think that's the conflict, between the owner's rights to their property and how they want to use it. And the collective right of a town or community to preserve its resources. And it's kind of the tension reminds me of what we read in college when I took ecology classes, which was the tragedy of the commons, where everyone raises their cows on the commons. And because raising one more cow gave the farmer more profit, everybody did it, and then the commons did not do grass for anyone. And so the idea is that the individual, if every individual is allowed to maximize their use of the property, regardless of community resources, the community suffers, and eventually that person suffers too. I don't think it's that extreme. I think there's got to be a compromise somewhere.
So, and that's part of why it's a concrete thinker. If we're talking about generic wetlands, it's helpful to me to know specifically, primary, secondary, what are those areas, not just a little puddle here and there, but what really matters to us as a town in terms of important wetlands.
Yes, I think we really need to have that conversation before we designate the prime wetlands, so I noticed, like, for instance, Fitzwilliam and Wolfboro both designated about a dozen prime wetlands in their town. And if I look at this matrix and I see these wetlands are scored from 1 to 13 points based on how many of these boxes they check. And if I take every wetland that's scored 6 and up, that's about a dozen wetlands. But I don't know if we're weighting them all the same, weighting all the categories the same. And then there are these wetlands that I think I need more information from Jeff on what are these rare biological or geological features and which conservation plans are we talking about? And so there's more information to be gathered, I think, before we do that. We want to be thoughtful about it.
That's only the designation.
The designation.
Yeah.
Well, it looked like from the study that a lot of the prime were over by the airport. The largest section of prime were over by the airport. There were a few pockets in this end of town, looked like across Route 10 up that way, or a couple of small pockets there. But over in where the airport is around the South Branch and maybe towards the center, I forgot, I was looking at those maps there. Somewhere in there.
West part of town.
In that part over there, yeah, so that's probably where they would end up being, I'd say. But getting back to the setbacks. The zoning ordinance has to be fair, in my opinion, it can't, you gotta give, well, I think Jay said you gotta give both ways. You can't be taking somebody's property and just because of the common good, which is, everybody understands the common good, but there has to be a line drawn someplace else. You can look around town, I know I go out there, California Street, probably a lot of people do California Street. Just before you get to Route 10, on the right-hand side, there's a house there, they have a bunch of little goats and stuff, little play areas for their goats and everything. And there's a wetland right there between their goat land and we'll say Route 10
feet from it.
in Route 10, well, if you take 75 feet from that, then they aren't gonna have their goats anymore. They might have them up by the garage, but that's about it. I mean, and I don't see, maybe you can point out where they're harming that, but I don't see how that they're harming that, and you'd be taking that from those people or other people like that. They, I would say would be grandfathered in, I don't think you could do anything to them for having it before the ordinance goes in, but still, it's other people like that. Someone, grazing, maybe, you know, if you had a stream running down your field, you'd have to probably fence off, right, 75 feet on both sides of the fence, so you got 150 feet taken out of your grazing area there. Doesn't, it's not fair, and to me anyways, to have that much there, something less would be, in my opinion, not fair. Or the 100 feet goes, I don't know. That one, we'd have to see where those lands were, if those were lands where probably nothing is ever going to be developed, as in some of those drawings, you can see that most of that, or not most, but a lot of it is probably not going to be developed anyway. So that wouldn't hurt anything on the prime lands there, if that's where they were. But again, more detail would have to be seen as to where they are.
I think it's important too that everyone's clear, a setback is different than a buffer. And I just wanna make sure we're all on the same page about that.
Well, it's acting as a setback. Let's
Well,
put it
a
that way.
buffer, we're talking a vegetative buffer
Yeah,
and then
but
setback, which was, am I correct in saying that?
Yes, and we're kind of proposing it be the same, but it doesn't have to be.
Right,
So there are some towns that do like a 75-foot setback, but within that, maybe only 30 feet or 50 feet of that has to be a vegetated buffer. So, you know, you could have your house and mow a little bit of lawn and then have whatever your 50 feet. So, I mean, there is wiggle room there to change that if we wanted to. We are suggesting right now that it be the same, but if there's a lot of resistance to that and people would rather have the buffer be different than the setback, that's the same.
that's right.
Yeah.
That would, we'll say, for instance, the house is over on Wilson Pond there. If you have that 75-foot buffer, then all those yards are not gonna be mowed, right? It's gonna be
But we're talking, that's grandfather, though, right?
grandfathered in there, okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're talking about new construction, new projects.
So it might,
But certainly, if you ask the, what's it called, Lake Smart program, if you should have a vegetated buffer or not, they will tell you yes.
I've
If
heard,
you
yeah.
want to protect the lake water quality,
there, yeah.
you should have a naturally vegetated buffer.
That's probably the biggest issue that comes up with property is that immediate buffer off the pond.
But I'll bet you if you were to give them the option of having that vegetative buffer, Wilson Pond or Swanzey Lake, or a nice backyard, you probably get, say, 90% of them are gonna have that backyard there, put that buffer there.
But if they understood why you needed a buffer and in fact.
Yeah, I know, explaining it to them,
Yeah.
this is why we're doing it, you
Exactly.
know, the whole business there. I would still say that they'd say, yeah, my neighbor should have it, but I shouldn't have it, you know?
Well, but I do think.
Neighbors burn.
Like, we've had those discussions with people on Wilson Pond but as that with people on Swanzey Lake, and yes, we convinced a few people.
Yeah,
And people who are more than happy to plant nice looking shrubs on the water's edge to vegetate that part of it to provide more water retention and so on. It's getting there, and then Bud has this great workshop, I can send you the PowerPoint for about fertilizing your lawn with non-phosphate fertilizers. You know, it's all good. We have lots of things we're doing, so.
It's primarily preventing the runoff from going directly into the water.
yeah, I
It's
get it.
wanted to be captured and absorbed, so at least it's getting some filtering. Remind what that water consists of, you know.
Yep, I understand the reasoning, but I don't think it's fair, so. Let's.
On the other hand, if, let's say, like Veronica mentioned, her land, I assume you're over by the South Branch. And if somebody upstream is doing something that pollutes that or causes extra runoff, then it affects her downstream. That really isn't fair either.
No,
So when you get to it, it's just like any relationship, there's give and take. So if you're gonna live upstream, you've got to think about the guy downstream. And if you're on a stream, you're upstream from somebody anyway, unless you're at the mouth of the river. So you have to consider not just fair to you, but fair to everything around you.
and then you have to add into that what could happen to what has happened. I mean, something that could happen, has it happened? Or is it likely to happen? You know, then you get into that too.
Well, I remember when that happening, what happened from West Street in West Swansea, close to that same place where you're talking about the
Yeah, area there.
goats.
You mean where they built a little
Mhm.
townhouses there?
Mhm. I don't think they've been the most popular place for people to find a home either. And they're in a wet spot.
You talking about what, Ford Road?
No,
No.
on this side of Route 10, let's see, just about
There's
about halfway
the
up.
condos
Yeah.
that they put in there.
Little town right there.
Slammed it in there. I don't think so.
Well, they're there, I guess, yeah, they haven't built them all in there, right? They haven't.
No, not.
They can't sell once they cut.
God
Probably
willing,
gets
they
it.
never will.
Well, let's move on down through here. We haven't decided much, we don't really have to decide much, but let's move through it a bit. So, I think we're on B now. We've got as an item number 2 under B, this is new. Wetlands include but are not limited to any freshwater wetland, which includes marshes, swamps, bogs, and wooded bottomlands. I think we can probably agree that that's what a wetland is. I don't know, but it sounds pretty reasonable, to me, pretty fair. And that's something new, obviously. Number 2, any surface waters, including lakes, ponds, rivers, streams, and intermittent streams, and vernal pools, and land under said waters, lakes, and fourth order streams are included in shoreline protection district as well.
So I had some questions there. This kind of came, I think, directly from the Fitzwilliam ordinance, so I wasn't sure if we wanted to use it or not, but again, that kind of goes back to, you know, we've got 3 different overlay districts. So maybe we don't want to say anything about lakes and fourth order streams because those are included in our shoreline protection district. And then we also have a floodplain district, which would cover any land subject to flooding. So in this case, we might not.
Maybe number 2 might not need to be in there then, because that's really much what we're talking about. Any surface waters, including lakes, ponds, rivers, streams, and intermittent. And vernal pools, and underwood said waters, yeah, so. Yeah, no,
You talk about parentheses 2 and parentheses 3. Nothing in there.
I'm just talking about that number 2 right now. Do you have the same thing that we have? Okay, and under B, 1, then there's 2, and then 1 and 2 underneath that, I guess. It's number 2 underneath that.
So I guess if we feel like we don't need to define wetlands further, we can leave out that entire number 2.
That talks about the surface waters, including lakes, ponds, and so on, and then it ends up talking about.
No, I mean the entirety of number 2. If we feel like we don't need to define wetlands further because we've already said it's,
Oh,
you know,
the entirety.
yeah, we've already said up top under number 1 that it's, you know, inundated or saturated by surface water, et cetera, et cetera. So that's probably enough of a definition. I think number 2 kind of goes into more because we're talking about, maybe we're talking about lakes or maybe we're talking about floodplains. But if we're not going to talk about that stuff, we can probably leave that entirely out. I just think it would behoove us in the future to think about lumping all that together. I don't know how you feel about that.
I'll say remove for now.
Yeah.
Now we're
For now.
that.
Okay.
Just part of it there.
Not saying forever.
We're removing this one right here.
The entirety of number 2.
That whole,
Yeah, that's what I said, that's 2.
and it includes those 1 and 2 right there.
So, and then if we're not gonna designate prime wetlands at this time, we would also then eliminate number 3 at this time. But that's, if we decide not to designate prime wetlands right now. So I guess that's just sort of the difference between wetlands and prime wetlands.
Yep, that'd probably be, and I don't see us getting to that point of it. Prime wetlands part of it before town meeting at all. That's a lot of
Probably
things
not.
to do.
Would you guys agree that we should take more time?
You're gonna have
on
to.
designating the
I'm
prime.
wondering whether we have, at some point, we have to get a prime wetlands definition of town meeting before we can do any of the other stuff we want to do with support.
Right.
I'm not sure. Well, I'm not sure we do. I think we could go ahead with, for instance, the 75-foot setback. And then save the 100-foot setback for another time, but that may be a discussion we need to have at the next meeting.
I see,
yeah,
anything that relates to crime, we might have to leave until we get the crime on time.
right, and I don't wanna, I hate to like jump into it too quickly and have people go, wait a minute, wow, you know? So, I wanna get people's input, I guess, on that.
So. Prime wetlands, we're leaving that out for now.
Number 3.
That would be number 3 right on this one here.
Yep, I've got it.
I'd say, yeah.
And then when that's
Leave it out.
determined, that can be revisited when it's determined. I think consensus was.
It looks like you want-
Yeah, it depends on what order you guys think we should do things.
So I wouldn't put too much thought in. I worry if you say 75 foot and then you come back later and you're like, oh, but 100 foot here, people will not take, well, it's gonna.
I thought about that, yes, I,
Like, you're like, oh, we said 75 foot, yay, and then you're like, oh, actually, now we're gonna say 100 foot for these prime wetlands. It's just I worry that people will.
So it's a definition needs to be defined, and then it'd be nice to identify prime wetlands.
You have to before.
A whole nother
If
process.
we only have a dozen, 15 of them, it might be, some of them are inaccessible areas anyway, it might be easier than we think it is, but we have to identify them first.
yes,
Yeah, and the identification is simply what we value as a meeting,
yes.
so.
I mean, we could easily do it from this. I have it sort of done, but it would just need to fly with people. And we would need to decide how we're gonna weight these, you know, if they're all equal.
And again, the property owners would have to be brought into the board to get it, to explain what was going on and why. And then the town would have to vote on whether to accept those as prime wetlands or not.
And we could do that work first or second, depending on what you guys think. We could delineate the prime wetlands and then build off of that, or we can do the work we were just talking about first and then delineate prime wetlands. I don't really know which is a good option.
So, let me just, I'm just trying to picture this. So if we have on the warrant, if you have the 75-foot setback be a different article than the 100-foot setback, and maybe the 100-foot prime wetlands doesn't fly, but the 75 does. Is that an option? Could we do it that way? Could we have it be 2 different things that people would either have to vote them both in, or they could do one or the other?
Without identifying those prime wetlands.
No, I'm not saying, no, say we did, say we
Oh,
came up
okay,
with
say
that
we did
list, say it was out there. Would it be 2 separate articles so that people could say, well, I'm okay with this 75-foot, but not the 100-foot, so they didn't have to throw the whole baby out with the bathwater?
Might be,
Yeah, I think it would have to be.
if they're in the same year with the warrant article. And one passes and the other one doesn't, meaning the town doesn't go along with designating those prime areas as prime wetlands. Yeah, you get the setback to go in there. You're referring to something that isn't there. Again, it might have to be in 2 separate years to delineate. But you have, go through that process there, have the town vote on it, yes or no. Then if the town votes yes, then you do the setbacks for it. Either the next year probably to see.
Well, if we wrote, I'm just trying to do procedural, if we wrote this so that say the town rejected the list of prime wetlands and the 100-foot setback, would we just change the way the ordinance is, or can we just leave that part out of the ordinance? Is that how it works?
Not when it's voted on. I mean, even if it refers to nothing in the ordinance, if it's voted on by town meeting as to after going through the public hearing process with the planning board, whatever wording is there has to stay there. And if the town votes on it, that's what we want, that's there, regardless of whether it refers to something that was passed or not.
I guess I.
So it would still be in there.
Kind of lost.
If it's whatever the verbiage is in that warrant article cannot be changed.
No, I understand that. Yeah, I guess I'm trying to ask. Say, you know, so on the warrant article, you've got different parts of this that people are voting on. If they just don't like that one part, we can still have the rest of it,
It can
right?
be set up that way. Yeah, that's what you're asking.
That's what I'm
It can be
asking.
set up that way.
Okay,
You said you can.
It can be set up that way, but 2 different articles.
If you're defining prime wetland as separate definition, and then you have subsequent articles relating to that, and the town says no to the prime wetlands, the others become moot.
mm-hmm,
So
So we'd have to write it carefully so that there was no other reference to
Yeah.
it, or,
my opinion is that you'd have to get the definition of prime wetlands through first this year, or, and then come back, as Scott is saying, with the other.
you mean come back with the list later?
With the restrictions on
The
it. I
following
mean, you can
year.
pass the list and then come back following year. If it does pass, then you do your restrictions on it, which I guess in this term is only, what, 100 feet.
And then we want to make sure your voter's guide is very clear on why, how. So you just.
So we could designate prime wetlands, but not have
Well, you can do it, you both,
the
but,
setback.
Yeah, you can do it both, but you're at risk
Can-
of something being denied and throwing off the whole.
and then confuse.
I suppose it probably wouldn't happen, but if somebody said. that these things that relate to prime wetlands were acceptable, but they didn't accept the list of prime wetlands. Then you could
Oh, that's
say, well,
interesting, actually.
then you just redefine the list of prime wetlands and. Then they apply, so if there's nothing that's a prime wetland, then that article doesn't apply. But it's voted in, so later you define what a prime wetland is and get that passed, but all of a sudden there is something that's there. So it could work that way, I just
could
don't
work
see
that
it
way.
happening that way.
Let me ask Cordell, actually, that's a good question.
That actually seems like a better approach, because we really are talking about wetlands and prime wetland so much together. And the only thing that's different is the buffer. Or the setback. So I think that's a better way to go. As far as.
If you confuse the voters by Adjournment, they will reject you.
Yeah, but we don't want to be confused.
So don't confuse them.
Right.
So for now, what are we doing?
I'm
I
confused.
think we're leaving it, right?
Leave it in.
We're leaving it because, you know, we're just going over this whole list things primarily right now. We aren't, the planning board isn't voting yes or no to put any of these things in there, right? We aren't making any motions,
Right.
we're just discussing it here.
Just recording it, so you're leaving
Yeah.
in number 3, prime wetlands.
Yes.
Okay.
That brings us to number 4. That would be an addition of this paragraph. The determinations of the boundaries between wetlands and uplands shall be made in accordance with methods outlined in the 1987 U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Wetland Delineation Manual Y-87-1 and the regional supplement to the Corps of Engineers Wetland Delineation Manual, North Central and Northeast Region version 2, or as amended. Sounds fair. I mean, that's what they go by anyway. That's what the
Yeah,
soil scientists
yes,
go by.
okay.
I mean, that's just
I think
how it is.
I think that's important to say though,
Mhm.
so that when a developer wants to put something in there, they say we follow these regulations.
Well, on the planning board part of it there, they have to delineate the wetlands and a soil scientist has to sign it. And the soil scientist has to use that. I don't care if it's in there or not. I'm just saying that that's what they're gonna go by. That's what they have to go by.
Mhm.
And when the Conservation Commission, you all review it, you're looking for that designation as well. I assume the engineer stamp says wetlands were delineated by a soil scientist, correct?
Mhm.
When we got a chance to ask questions. Sometimes things come to us before, well, after we've met, before we've met. Yes, we don't
Oh, yeah,
have a chance.
we tried to fix that, I think, last year.
We're still in the middle of
Yeah.
fixing that. I think it's next year we might have a good solution, but
Well,
to be determined.
now, as far as the site plan review regulations had nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah.
We've pretty much said that if the Conservation Commission hasn't reviewed it, then it has to go to another, or it has to be postponed or.
Which is fair.
Another meeting.
Yeah.
I think that's fair, yeah.
Yeah, that's what we've been doing, so we tried to fix it.
So this section B could be one warrant article.
Maybe. I need to write these first, and then after I write these, we can do a test run, and then after we do a test run, we can do a public hearing. But after this meeting, I can draft a rough draft,
Okay.
and then we'll know. I'll send that rough draft to Cordell and see what he thinks, and then he's gonna give me notes, and then after that point, we're not meeting again until December 12th, so we have time. I'm gonna get a rough draft done before Thanksgiving, so. That way he can have something good to look over for dinner that night.
So we're leaving that number 4 in. I
Yeah.
think. Okay. That brings us down to C, general provisions, and let's see, 1 and 2 stays the same from our ordinance. Comes down to D, under uses permitted. And there's a bunch of changes here. Uses permitted in the Wetlands Conservation District, provided that all required permits have been obtained are as follows. We've got a number 1 here that says maintaining, repairing, or replacing an existing and lawfully located structure or public utility, provided that the work conforms to the general standards adopted in this section. And I don't know, we might want to be a little more specific with that. We'll have to see. And okay, that's the new number 1, because our old number 1 is which is number 12 here, I guess. Our old number 1 is water impoundments, and they've got this crossed out. Okay, water impoundments to the extent that wildlife considerations will allow, and then we have construction of wells for water supply. So right now, our ordinance allows the water impoundments to the extent that wildlife considerations will allow. And yeah, so considering taking out impoundments, which I'm assuming are dams, is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think, you're altering the flow of the wetland potentially when you're impounding water.
Yeah.
So I think that was why Jeff didn't like that.
So you just construction of wells and water supply, and yeah, I don't think anybody's gonna be damming up wetlands anyways these days, but never know. Let's just move to number 2. And it's not going to allow drainage ways, streams, creeks, or other paths of normal runoff water. Why is that?
Well, I don't understand why that was in there anyway. It just didn't make sense.
Because you're talking about natural.
It's already a stream or a creek or,
Yeah, natural things, correct?
and you really shouldn't be creating new channels in the
Yeah.
wetland.
I think what it's referring to is drainage ways, drainage streams, and drainage creeks.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I don't think that's
So that-
appropriate.
Yeah, you're
That's
not
right.
trying to drain the wetland, and this was something people used to do that was a big no-no. So.
You know, whole stream of going.
But it does say other paths of normal runoff water. I mean, if it's normal runoff water,
Yeah, it didn't make sense to me,
Why is that?
the way it was written, and what Jay said was, I thought. The way people could interpret it was that it's okay to create a drainage. To drain your wetland, which is not okay, so.
How could it be a normal, use is permitted, it's a use as a normal runoff channel, that sounds like you're not doing anything, you're not really using it.
Well, the normal runoff water could just indicate rain versus water from some other source.
It doesn't have to be part of the ordinance.
so we're looking to leave that crossed out is the question here.
Yes, I think that should go away. It's A, unclear, and B, if someone interprets it as it's okay to channelize and drain the wetland, that would be bad.
Board members, any?
Makes sense.
Leave it crossed out? Yeah, that's fine. Jane, you're on here.
What?
Any comments on that?
No.
Okay. Okay, so
So they're removing
You're leaving-
all item 2.
we're leaving it as, yeah, they're removing it, we're leaving it as. Item 3, which is our item 3, that hasn't changed at all. Wildlife habitat development management stays. Item number 4. See, it is not allowing parks and such recreation uses as are consistent with the purpose and intent of section C, which again, section C is general provision, right?
So I substituted, the different number 4, which kind of covers that, but in a slightly different
Where is
way.
it? Is that the 5-4 underneath it?
Yes.
Yes, so, yeah, it shouldn't say 5-4, I'm sorry.
So-
It should just say number 4, but it's conservation areas and footpaths, footbridges and boardwalks, providing for low impact recreational uses such as fishing, hunting, hiking, bird watching and nature study, provided A, said structures are constructed so as to permit the unobstructed flow of water, and B, the natural contour of the wetland is preserved.
Sorry, keep going.
That's it.
Okay, I just have a quick recommendation, combining A and B just into the paragraph above. Because it's gonna be it's gonna be tough on the warrant articles to write.
Sure, however you want to come.
Yeah, so I'm probably just gonna combine those two
Mhm.
into the paragraph above.
They're not A and B, which, what,
They're right there.
If that's okay with
Those,
those.
into, you
just
said
combine,
one
putting those
sentence,
into that fund.
one sentence.
Yeah, as one, yeah.
Okay,
as one
are you
paragraph.
leaving the elimination of this four?
No, I think, yeah, the elimination of number 4.
Yeah.
Is probably, unless the board, anybody else. I think we should cross out our original number 4.
Yeah.
Okay, and substitute it with this number 4. And we're also combining the small a and small b
Yeah,
with
got
that
it.
same paragraph.
Got it.
Okay, all right. Let's go to 6, Steve. Well, I guess that's remaining open spaces as permitted by subdivision regulations and other sections of the ordinance.
Could somebody explain what that means? Sorry, go ahead, Jake.
I think it becomes number 5.
Yeah, it becomes number 5.
Well, we're gonna go by these numbers until we change it.
However, it's numbered.
That's our original number 6. I
Original
put the
number
original
6.
numbers down there just so we can compare it to our zoning.
Maybe somebody can explain to me what that means, because I wasn't entirely sure.
I don't know either. Open spaces or open spaces, you know, you don't.
Conservation subdivision, that's what I thought it probably meant.
We would have to dig into our subdivision regulations, which we probably don't want to do right now. I can write a quick paragraph on it when I do the warrant articles, if you guys really want me to.
No, I mean, it's in there. We didn't see any reason for it not to be in there.
Leave it.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
leaving number
That works.
6.
Yep, he bases.
Yeah. Number 7, let's see, we've got, that's removing forestry and tree farming in wetlands, taking that out and replacing with limited tree harvesting following best management practices for maintenance of healthy forests and restoration due to forest pathogens.
I found some wording that I liked a little better, but I haven't run it by the Conservation Commission yet, but wording regarding both agriculture and forest management in another ordinance, which I liked, but I'll just read that now and you can see what your reaction is to it. But forest management in the wetlands buffer, so not in the wetland itself, but in the wetlands buffer, consistent with best management practices published by the New Hampshire Department of Resources and Economic Development, UNH Cooperative Extension. So there was that, and then there was another one saying agriculture in the wetlands buffer, where it does not impair the function and values in the adjacent wetlands, consistent with best management practices, etc. So it's not allowing forestry and agriculture directly in the wetland. You're not plowing up the wetland, but you're allowing that to occur in the buffer as long as it's following best management practices and you're not having all that goat poo washed downstream.
Jay,
That implies we have a buffer, so.
Yes, that implies we have a buffer.
Well, I think that's a concession a little bit with the buffer and you're worried about how people can use their land. Correct?
Hmm.
Like that allows some land use, if not just don't have it, you know,
It's somewhat natural too.
yeah.
And as long as they're following best management practices.
not too much tree harvesting gonna go on in 75 feet.
There's some,
In any way, either way. So we're looking at number 7.
and also that would apply to, say, forest crossings. So when we did the cutting in Mount Crescent, you had to cross small intermittent streams and brooks and things like that. And they're following best management practices. And that is actually, I think you're crossing the wetland itself. So we might want to make sure we're not, that our language is not prohibiting stuff like that. As long as they're following best management practices.
Did you want to cite anything after best management practices?
Yeah.
Did you want to like parentheses cite?
Reason.
Oh, NH Department
So
of
does
Resources.
anyone
Okay.
know of any forestry or tree farming in wetlands going on in town at all, anywhere? I mean,
Technically, not forestry, but salvage for sure.
And that have gone on in this town that you know of, or?
Goes on my property, you know, tree falls down and I've gotta get out of there.
So, but would that fall under,
Well, I don't know, is that the best management practice? I mean, that's a question. I don't know if that includes salvage cuts. Because we do have to provide for that, when we're
Yeah.
getting another hurricane, we gotta be ready to.
oh, yeah. But, let's see, yeah, so,
Yeah, I just don't know, that's just a concern, it's not a game change, you know, to stop it. It's a
because
question.
we're talking about taking that out of there and just putting the tree harvesting in the setbacks or buffer areas and not in the wetlands at all, so that would alleviate that, I would think.
I think, I mean, yeah, I don't wanna like completely, you know, eliminate forestry and agriculture where it's being done to best management practices. So there's gotta be some wording that we can come up with there that.
You just said it, forestry and tree farming and adhering to best management.
Well,
practices.
and then the way, I think the way we had it here, what did we say?
Tree harvesting.
What did I say in here?
So. Limited tree harvesting. But those were-
Yeah, limited tree harvesting for, yeah, so that does allow for limited tree harvesting for maintenance of healthy forests. So if you did have a hurricane or you did have a big disease go through or something and you wanted to salvage trees, that would certainly allow that.
But it has to pertain to the wetlands, not the buffer zone.
No, that one does, is that 7?
So,
Yeah, that one does pertain to the wetland itself. So, yeah, I think we could monkey around with this a little bit more so that we're not prohibiting something that is.
Sorry,
Beautiful.
they do have a section that pertains to severe weather events.
They who, UNA?
Yeah, so what, if we're gonna cite this, then we'll just need to look at this provision to make sure that all is kosher, which I think we should be.
So you're still working on number 7? mean,
Yeah, I
that's-
think
that's gonna
we
be a work
should
in progress.
work on the agriculture and the
So
forestry
keep that.
language a little bit.
Yep, I got it.
Okay. Brings it down to number 8. Agriculture and wetlands. Let's see, so. Is there any agriculture going on in wetlands?
we don't have any rice farms.
Oh, rice farming, yeah,
Cranberry farms?
yeah, well, I guess, so,
cranberry
right?
farms.
I don't know, yeah, I guess so, well, you know, the state of New Hampshire encourages agriculture in the whole state, in fact. Part of our, the planning board or zoning regulations has to do with allowing, making sure that agriculture is maintained and allowed in the state. So, it's one of our purviews,
Mhm.
having a zoning ordinance. So if we're gonna eliminate agriculture and wetland, we're going against that, I suppose, and if someone wants to have a
Well,
cranberry farm in here.
somebody came and wanted to have a variance to put a cranberry farm in here, well, maybe that would be more.
Well, don't rule it out, but we'll have to have more rain than we've had lately.
Since we probably don't have too much going on right now, agriculture in our wetlands, and we don't have too many cranberry farms, what's the harm of leaving it in there?
Before our house was built, before we built our home, there were cranberries on that lot down.
Did you build on a wetland?
Mhm.
Oh, boy, oh, boy.
But that was 53 years ago.
Oh, no, that's no
Nobody
excuse.
really knew it.
That's no excuse.
Yeah. the
Yeah, you'll have to
cranberries,
rescind your seat.
not a lot of it, there were cranberries.
We have to differentiate,
Okay.
does a floodplain become a wetland, you know, if some people, there are places that do agricultural. Pursuits in floodplains. So,
But the delineation of a wetland has to do with certain soil conditions, so it
Yeah.
could be delineated from the floodplain. Correct? Or no?
correct.
Delineated as a floodplain?
From the floodplain. He's talking about what's the difference, you know, you got a floodplain coming to the wetlands, they overlap because you're using storage in there. But the wetlands can be delineated if they needed to.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, I think we need to monkey with that language a little bit as well.
Said, you know, what's the harm of leaving it in there, but I'm saying, what's the harm of taking it out, so.
I think Scott's worry, he was like RSA related, right?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll dig around in the RSA's a bit when I'm doing the warrant articles.
Yeah.
If there's a conflict with an RSA, it might have to stay in, but we'll see.
I don't think there's a conflict there. I'm just going by the RSA that gives us permission to do a zoning ordinance. And it just says that one of the things we have to look at is to encourage and in order to keep
Correct, I see.
the agricultural and not to get it out of the state.
Okay.
So.
I'll
look
highlight
at
that. Yeah.
674-70.
Yep.
Can be agricultural by special exception, if I'm that right,
Um,
in front of the board.
you know,
You don't
they,
want a pig farm
no,
in your wetland.
you probably don't. And we probably don't have any here. So
Especially not a Smith.
we're thinking about number 8. I think we're thinking about number 7. We're thinking about number 8.
Okay.
We aren't done with those yet. So that brings us to number 9, and we're thinking about crossing out the construction or reconstruction of fences, footbridges, catwalks, wharfs, and structures that enhance the site as wildlife habitat provided.
I think that was addressed under the earlier number 4. I tried to combine those.
Okay, let's see here. So we could just cross that out as it is crossed out, number 9 yet, because right, that is falls under that new number 4.
Right.
Let's see, what we have here.
And then the A and B,
Yeah,
again,
we don't need that
pertain to the earlier,
because that's.
I combined all that earlier.
Yeah, okay, so that number 9 is no longer,
Right.
and those with it are no longer. Brings us to 10. And this is being crossed out. Alteration of the surface configuration of the land by filling or dredging, provided that. And we're crossing that out, providing out the alteration enhances the wetland wildlife aspect of the site and natural contour of the wetland is preserved. But, you know, there's pretty much no dredging going on in the wetlands, or shouldn't be anyways, so
Right.
that's kind of a no-brainer to leave that one out of there, probably. That's fair, right?
Well, I mean, the man who was here before was talking about filling in a little there.
He was, and it is done right with state permit though, correct? It has to go through the conservation commission first, and then, yeah, it's all, yeah, alteration of
Alteration of terrain,
Yeah.
it's not gonna be state roads. So.
yeah, so it could still be. We could still probably do it, even if we left that out of here. Which we're contemplating, so are we leaving that out? That's number 10 we're on there. I think that's fair to leave that out, yeah. Number 11. Construction of streets, roads, and other access ways and pipeline, power lines, and other transmission lines. Where's that leave us?
Well, so it should not, it's not something that should be done without a permit.
Right. Yeah,
So
so
it's
can we,
crossed out.
shouldn't be done without a permit, something like that in there?
Well,
There
but
are
it's,
transmission lines and-
it's,
there are-
later on, we talk about having, you know, that's something that you would go for a permit for, or a variance or a special exception, however we're gonna do it, but it's not something that's just automatically you can go in and do. It's not a permitted, I mean, what is
Their
it?
use is part of it.
Then,
Use is permitted. Provided all required permits, okay, I'm sorry. I'm screwed up here, so, yeah, provided all required permits have been obtained. So that one was a little bit, yeah, that one was a little bit iffy,
where are you now? Are you still on number 11?
yes.
Okay. Where did you get the permits part of it? I don't see it in there.
So that's something that I think we need to talk about a little bit more, like how that's gonna work.
Yeah, but yeah, it could or should be allowed with permits, or it could be allowed as a special exception. We don't have any
Yeah.
special exceptions in this, but we could put a special exception there. Where it's got that one more degree of scrutiny from ZBA.
So you know, you want to avoid it at all costs if you can, and if
Yep,
there's no
but you don't
other
wanna exclude
place to do it. What's that?
Don't want to exclude it completely, but you want to avoid it and give it another set of eyes to look at it.
Right.
ZBA maybe.
Yeah, so,
A special exception would do that
yeah,
with permit by permit. Yeah, so you can think about that one too.
You have to cross over some wetlands to get to, 10 acres on your
You might,
property.
you don't want to have to get a variance or any of that business to do it, but you want to make sure that.
so how would we, I mean, I'm agreeing with you there. How would we approach that? Is it okay to cross it out here and address it later?
Well,
Or-
we can cross it out here and add it in as a special exception, and the following uses are permitted under special exception, and then that could be listed under that
Okay,
with the proper permits.
Another work, but yeah, we can do that.
There- We probably aren't gonna have all these, like you said before, all in there, but we're just straightening it out, talking over iron the whole thing.
mm-hmm,
See
So that
how,
would be a set,
what
that's
falls
another
out.
section.
Gotta come up with the end goal and then you can go and then we can figure out what we can.
So I'm just gonna mark this special exception.
I have on here.
Okay. And that's number 11 we're talking about.
yeah,
Okay. Now we have under E, special provisions. And I think that's crossed out. We're just using that as requirements. That looks like that's what's the.
yeah, I was
intent there.
searching for a better word, but
Requirements. Okay, so it says under the first one, requirements, no leach field, septic tank, pump chamber is added in there, or dry well may be loaded, located to the closer than 125 feet to any designated wetland within, that's crossed out. Then we have within, 75 feet of wetland, so it's changed to the 75 feet like we were talking about before. Then it says or 100 feet of prime wetland, but where that's up in the air, the prime business there. Expansion of an existing system to accommodate additional loading shall be considered new. Yeah, that's fair, new construction. That's fair, because that would mean you're expanding your use on the property probably, so you're expanding your septic use. That makes sense, maybe. Let's see, I think there's more to that, right? Let's see, oh, that's already in our zoning. We aren't taking care of that. We're just crossing out. But yeah, changing that to 75 and 100. And let's see.
I guess I highlighted it because I just had some question of whether that's how we still do it, or is that something you want to keep in there?
That probably should stay in there because it gives an out to someone who is non-conforming to begin with. And if you have to replace your septic system, you have to replace your septic system.
Yeah.
So the state can sign off on that.
And Jerry put in 100-foot requirement. but
Yeah, 75/100, but that
75/100.
may or may not be in there depending on how we
Yeah.
do the rest of the ordinance there. So I guess all of that is staying status quo as it's written here.
But this is
7,500.
This is the 100-foot septic system, 125-foot septic system.
That is being changed to
To a
setback for septic to a
being
wetland.
changed to 100.
Changed to 75 feet. And 100 feet if it's prime,
Mhm.
correct?
Yep, yes, that's what I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got it?
Yeah, but this is dealing specifically with the septic setback.
Yep,
Where it's currently 125 feet and we're opting to change it to 100.
to 75/100, 75 feet.
No,
no.
This is not wetlands, this is the septic setback, right? That
To
we're
what?
talking about.
Setback to what?
Changing it from 125 to 100.
Setback to what? From the septic system to what?
To
Wetlands.
wetlands.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I don't know why I just have 100, maybe it should be 75 slash.
I think 75/100 works better.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that's like a typo on my part, sorry.
I was just playing stupid.
With fine wetland.
That, we have that set, right, if we have to find the prime wetlands, we talked about that before. And we don't know whether we're going to, there's different wording that Adam was working on different wording, and I think Jerry was too. But it may or may not go. It probably doesn't make sense to do it, but it can be done without actually designating what the heck those wetlands are.
Everything's a wetland. If we haven't got a definition of prime, then any language about prime doesn't apply until we do have it.
Correct.
Right, yeah.
Correct.
So
We might confuse the voter.
Yeah, it will. I mean, I don't know if you said that before, but it will be
Yeah.
good for that.
You want me to take over reading? You've been reading all of them. Are you good?
Am I making too many mistakes?
No, you're good. I'm just thinking you've been reading a lot. Okay, it's your go.
So in something like this, do we just say, be in line with or whatever the wording would be with our wetland setbacks and not specifically mention the 175?
Let's see, it's wetland, because it's buffer zones we're talking about. And wetland and setbacks to a septic system, right? Is that what you're?
Yeah, I'm trying not to get hung up where we're talking about whatever the wetland setbacks become, right? If it's just 75 or if it's 75 and 100, based on
Might be 20.
prime, do we want to call those out here, or do we just want to refer to our wetland setbacks?
I think we want to just nail down how far can you put a septic system to a wetland regardless of what that buffer is.
So, yeah.
They vote on buffer, separate one article, and this is a separate warrant article. They can vote on the septic system as opposed to the buffer,
Right.
and at least get a septic system fixed.
Yeah, and that's state regulation for 75 feet. So.
Yeah.
We're okay.
Yep, I just want to.
So it's gonna be 75 foot setback to a wetland, unless it's prime, but we'll get into that right now.
So no 100 feet from prime wetlands.
Well, that's sort of still on the table.
That's
I thought
still on the table.
Yeah,
So we may not get there depending on how we feel.
Got it.
Work
in progress.
Working through that one, correct. See, that brings us to number 2, talking about wetland areas, and then we're adding in, see, wetland areas, adding in excluding bodies of water. Let's see, may be used to satisfy minimum lot area and setback requirements. Let's see, and may not be used when, okay, so we're crossing out and may not be used because we had that before. The new part of it is provided that 75% of the minimum required lot size is contiguous, non-wetland, and that the contiguous non-wetland area is sufficient in size and configuration to adequately accommodate all required utilities such as wellhead, sewer disposal, or on-site septic tanks and leach fields. So that's a step up from what it was before, because you couldn't use it at all before. So any questions on that? Yes, no? Sounds fair to me. It sounds more complicated than it really is.
It's contiguous now, okay,
Yeah.
so long as 3/4 by the way is dry.
Has to be contiguously dry, not separated by a multitude of little
And
wetlands.
that's of the minimum lot size for that particular zone.
There was a project that was came for the zoning and I think planning board last year where the driveway came in from the road. And it was the wetlands here, and then there was a dry area over here, there were wetlands over here, and it was very hard to see that 75% of that property, or that there was enough area on that property, we took the wetland out. It was very hard to see that there was enough to qualify for building stuff, for lot size.
So that there were the word contiguous.
Yeah, and therefore contiguous, and there was room there to put all the utilities, et cetera, and it was 75% of the lot. But it might not have been, if you didn't include the wetlands, it might not have been big enough for building. And that's, that kind of would have gone through, I think it did go through anyway, but it might have had to be more carefully measured than it would look like on the plans.
And that's a fair way to do it, to use it, you can build on a piece of property if you can fit everything on there, like you had just said, they could fit everything on there before, but it didn't qualify because of the, you couldn't add the wetlands into that requirement size.
Right, now, of course, if we go to buffers, we may refer to buffer issues, but this is.
Yeah, right, yeah, this is different than that, correct. So we're leaving that in there as presented, correct? I think. Okay, so that's one we're not working on. That one, number 2, leaving it as is.
As is, that's what I have.
And amended, as amended. Okay, number 3. See, so. Number 3 says, no new structure or building greater than 100 square feet in area shall be located within 75 feet of wetlands or 100 feet of prime wetlands. Again, I'm not in agreement with that because I think it takes too much, it'll take. You're taking 75 feet out of that piece of property there, and then you may not end up with enough to put that building on there, although with the section before you may. But still, that's just my thought about it. Anybody else?
When we say structure or building, structure, what following defines structure?
I'd say anything over 200 square feet.
Anything, any.
It depends. I mean,
Well, I think a structure can be a bridge or
yeah,
a hunting blind or.
Well, I think we have it in our zoning what a structure
we
is,
probably do.
and specifically, so we'll just find it here and we will say what we think it is, and we'll say what it actually is.
Yeah, we have like accessory structure. So anything constructed with a fixed location on the ground or attached to something having a fixed location on the ground. Items such as buildings, manufactured housing, pools, sheds, gazebos, garages, docks, boathouses are included in the definition, whether prefabricated or site built. Items such as underground waste disposal systems, driveways, water wells, fences, retaining walls, gates, signs, lampposts, mailboxes, flagpoles, well coverings, stairs, walkways, and uncovered patios are excluded from this definition. That's
Excluded parking areas are excluded.
yes, parking areas, yeah, that wouldn't be the definition, yeah. Does that right, Stefan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's still other.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, we have no new structure or building greater than 100 square feet in area shall be located within 75 feet of wetlands or 100 feet of prime wetlands. We have 20-foot setback for property lines. How about that? Maybe not.
What'd you say?
I said we have 20-foot setbacks if you're from a side property and rear property, you gotta be 20 feet from the other person's property, correct? Yeah, you have to do that with the building now. This is 75 feet if it's a wetland. Yeah. A building or structure rather.
So you're saying the property line to adjoining properties runs through a wetland.
No, I'm just using property, I'm just using
No.
property line setback as an
What I'm
example. here.
saying is it actually, that's too close to put properties together.
Yeah, but no,
It should be at least 75.
well, you'd have 40 feet between the two if there are two adjacent ones or two.
Or mine.
40 feet there. But I'm saying, how about 20-foot setback? Even though we haven't decided or it hasn't been voted on whether it's gonna be 75 feet buffer, because if that's the case, you still couldn't put it in that buffer. But I mean, I'm
Yeah.
bringing that stuff up.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we have a duty to protect that water.
You can put, Scott's, eventually put a 20-foot buffer around the wetland, they could have 20-foot setback from the wetland. The wetland extends to 20 feet more than what it's surveyed to be, and you have to have 20-foot setback, that gives you 40 feet, it's not 75. But it's
It's more like 8. You're talking about 80 feet right there. So I think we're losing on that one. So what are we doing here?
I don't agree with it. I think 75 feet, that's a lot. You can chimney on your shop at 75 feet, that thing's huge. That's
75 feet is,
It's taking away a lot of property.
Yeah, this building is, I think, like 80 maybe. So yeah, in my opinion, it's a fair amount, but you know my opinion about the buffers too. Same way, I think it's too much we're taking. But we're here to weed through these here, we aren't putting anything in stone, not a public hearing. So. We leaving that as is and passing over it? Or is there more discussion? There's no more discussion with passing over and going to the next one.
It's part of the general discussion about how much buffer is necessary for the wetland.
It is, you're right, yeah. So let's go to the next one.
Same discussion.
Yeah, it is, yeah. No parking area, yeah, maybe located within 75 feet of wetlands or 100 feet of prime wetlands. Impervious versus gravel,
I had just impervious versus gravel as a note, which we might want to make exceptions for
Yeah.
a gravel parking lot versus a hot top. Because with the gravel parking lot, you're not heating up that water as much. Running into the brook.
I think in our site plans, we consider the gravel impervious as well, I think.
Do you?
Yeah, we do, yeah.
So if that's the case, then I guess there's no difference.
Let's skip by that one. I think the same discussion as Jay said. Okay, number 5. No snow dumps may be located closer than 25 feet of any wetland other than snow removal from a driveway or parking area on premises. That's fair, I think. Jane, you don't think so? What do you think?
No, I'm just thinking about it.
What, you're thinking about where you're pushing your snow
I'm
from
just
your
thinking about
driveway?
it.
It's all wetland anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Doesn't matter, Jane. Jane, do you have a comment on that? Anybody else have a comment on that? No? Think that's fair or not fair?
My concern would just be what's in that snow, right?
Mm.
Are you moving?
Commercial.
How did you guys come up with the 25 feet with the snow out?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of these came directly out of like Fitzwilliam's ordinance and, my discussions with their planner there about what kind of issues people had with the ordinance or didn't have with it. And they said, we haven't had any issues with the ordinance. Anyway, that's where I got that from. It's just for some reason they decided 25 feet and they were fine.
100 feet and the 75 feet for everything else too is from Fitzwilliams.
Yes, that was Fitzwilliams, but they're not the only town doing that. There are other towns that do that as well. It's fairly common, not super common, but.
Pittsburgh is a little bit similar to us, we have a lot of water in the town.
Yeah, they seem like a good
There's
comparison.
hardly any business.
We got a lot of granite there too, not as much sand as we have. So, under our zoning, in the uses, any of the zones that I know of anyways, we don't allow snow dumps anyway. Anywhere in the zoning, so.
Well, yeah, then we should be stricter about that if that's the case.
No, we don't-
Wolfboro's was
we do
pretty
not allow it,
similar.
Is what I'm saying, so, I mean, you're talking about snow dump, you're talking about something we don't allow, so it doesn't even have to be.
Yeah,
Especially with the exception of snow removal from driveway parking, so that's, we do allow that, but we don't allow it. No. Like
Yeah.
municipal.
A snow dump is from another piece of property dumped onto another piece of property, two separate pieces of property we're talking about, not from the same piece of land, I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and is this, I mean, are those regulated by the town? It's certainly not, a site plan review doesn't talk about
A
that.
snow dump, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't allow a project that has, this is gonna be where we're gonna put all the snow from these three properties. You know, you get the snow.
Yeah.
That property.
From planning point, I mean, planning board perspective. That last, James. We allow the snow from that piece of property to be put wherever they show on the site plan, but we don't allow snow from another piece of property to be put on that piece of property.
So if that happens, that's a town enforcement issue, it's not.
Correct, yes, it is. That's right.
It's a
So
town.
we can eliminate this one.
so are we saying we should just not have this?
I'm saying, I don't think you should reference snow dumps,
Okay,
just,
take it out.
if we don't allow them anyways, then we don't have to give anybody any ideas.
Easy to deal with. Okay.
So, let's see, so six. So that whole thing is being removed, or are we modifying that sentence?
Number 5,
Yes.
Hold it.
number five.
Get rid of it.
get rid of it.
Rid of
Yeah,
it, okay. I think
You're gonna start making choices here.
Okay, Beverly was way ahead of us, she had gotten rid of it. All right, bring us over to number 6. This is no underground fuel storage tank or tank containing other hazardous materials shall be placed in the wetland conservation district. I think that's kind of a no-brainer right there.
Yeah.
So. We cross that one out too. I want to see if anybody's paying attention. Everybody paying attention? Keep it in. Okay, so that one stays in.
That's safe.
Yeah.
We're still waiting.
Okay. So. Number 7. No soil removal or change to the surface topography of soil or modification of existing drainage characteristics, including disturbance of water levels, water table, or water runoff pattern shall be allowed in the WCD. Here it comes up, now we see the WCD in here. So, that's fair, I think, right?
Yep.
Everybody, yeah,
Think so, yeah.
one stays in.
Okay.
And remember, when we talk about the WCD, we're also talking about that 75 and 100-foot buffer as defined earlier.
It doesn't say that there.
No, but it does. Earlier, we were defining the wetlands conservation district. Okay,
Okay, bring this over to number 8. Says no dumping, discharging or placement of fill of any kind shall be allowed in the WCD. And I don't think we allow dumping. Yeah, so I don't know about. Although if they have a permit, if they're gonna use fill, we'll say that guy was in here before, if they're gonna fill that little part of that little wetland there, they're putting fill into the wetland, so that's permitted, so. Might wanna have something in there that says unless permitted. Yes, no, maybe,
Yeah.
possibly, but we do have to make it fair to those little things happen. If they get a permit for it, obviously, if they don't, then we can't do it. So.
And the permit would come through town, you would count, would be permit.
Come through the state, I believe. They have to apply to the state, yeah,
Yeah.
Operating terrain.
yeah, it would be.
Might have to provide certain regulations on the type of bill that's going in there.
I don't know off the top of my head, but probably so.
If they do,
Unless-
I'll reference it in the warrant. if they
So-
need to.
The reference would be unless permitted by state.
That would go at the end. No dumping, discharging, or placement of fill. I could also add a reference after that stating any relevant RSAs or ordinances. I don't think there are, but there probably are.
Okay, so.
I'll write it in a
we're
way.
working on number 8.
Yeah, we're working on it.
To allow an art with a permit.
Yeah, I'll word that, so it's clear.
Okay. Number 9, no storage of equipment within the WCD.
I'd kind of like to amend that a little bit, just to add like. Cause I saw some other ordinances that mentioned salt storage and automobile junkyards. So, I don't know if that would fall under number 9, but we might wanna flesh that out a little more.
So clarify what you're saying.
Well, it might be 2 different things, so. I had no storage of equipment, I'm thinking like, you don't really wanna park a bunch of dump trucks or something in there, but also you don't want automobile junkyards or any kind of junkyards in there. And then also you don't want salt storage in your buffer. Or whatever. So that's probably a separate.
Yeah, junkyards are regulated by the state, of course.
Yeah, salt storage is regulated too.
Yeah.
So there's already laws about salt storage.
There are.
Those are tricky when I haven't been at the court. Troy had one, and with what the judge said, that thing had the value of $1, and he's trying to sell it as not something.
There you have
But even though all of us look at it and say that's junk.
Take my own pickup and drive it into the wetland just to get it out of my yard. And that's.
So. We allow 100 square foot storage sheds in the WCD. And that's storage in there. So just looking at that, that is kind of an exception to what we're saying here, because we do allow it. I saw it further in there, 100 square foot structure or whatever the heck they said it was. So 100 by square foot is usually a storage shed, and people have storage sheds in there, so. And I don't have a problem with them storing it in there at all, or you're in the storage shed, but some may say lawnmowers, gasoline and everything else, so. If you're allowing a storage shed in there, but no storage in it, what's the purpose of having a shed in there?
Well, so we might need to adjust that language a little bit.
Might have to. Let's say we're working on that. Okay. Brings us to 10. No introduction of non-native plant and animal species through fill or by a deliberate planting or release within the WCD. So
that one's a little bit of a reach. That one's a little bit out there, but we've been talking consistently with, when you guys come to the Conservation Commission, we ask people to plant native species in their landscaping. We don't want fill full of knotweed. We don't want to spread invasive species.
but enforcing, what are you gonna do when it?
I know, enforcing that one would be tricky.
And
You
then
are right.
proving that that's where it came from. Guys said, no, it wasn't.
Non-native or animal species are not allowed by the state of New Hampshire.
Well,
And-
let's keep it.
So, I mean, thinking as a zoning board member, I would have trouble with this one in the sense that someone's coming to us for a project, and I have to say, are you gonna put this in there? I'll say, oh, no, we're not gonna do that. But they might accidentally reduce it, in which case it might have violated the same law accidentally. But how do I decide whether or not they let the ordinance?
So you're saying
I'm not sure it should be in there.
that this would be hard.
That would be hard to, it'd be a hard one to enforce.
It would be, it also relates, it refers to fill, which on number 8, we say no fill. Then on number 10, we're saying if you filled it in there, which we aren't supposed to do, we don't want you to put these plants in here.
But the,
So you're saying eliminate that one, correct? Number 10?
yeah, I don't know what project
Because of-
involved the introduction.
I like it.
of
Yeah, I wanna keep it.
as a part of the use.
Yeah.
So that's the other one, because we're not gonna farm it there. So,
So anybody object to taking?
What did you like about it?
I like 10. I think you require that the plant, you can't do anything about animal species, but you require what they plant to be native. And when our code enforcement officer does a building inspection prior to occupancy, they can confirm that it's native. And then after that point, it's on them if they introduce any non-native.
okay, so that's within the, right now, it's including the buffer. But
Yeah.
if it's not the buffer, then why would anybody want to plant anything in the wetlands?
And maybe this belongs in in the site plan regs or something.
Yeah, maybe it doesn't belong here, maybe it belongs somewhere else.
You might want to site plan.
In my-
Yeah, we have a whole landscaping
In
section.
mine,
in the site
we have a
plan,
big
yeah.
section there.
We do have a big
Yeah.
section, yeah, let me take that.
Okay.
I-
Now,
You guys can live without number 10, anybody else? Okay, yeah, I can live without it.
we're up to number 11.
There.
All wetland buffers, area within 75 feet of wetlands or 100 feet of prime wetlands, will be required to remain in naturally vegetated state without mowing, spraying of pesticides or herbicides or other activities that will damage the vegetation therein and inhibit its ability to filter and slow water entering or leaving the wetland area.
How that affects the field down there with the hay down by the sewage.
Well, again, you know, we're talking about grandfathered areas as opposed to newer areas, but yeah, I see what you're saying there. If you don't let one person do it, but the other person can do it right up to the river, right? It doesn't make sense, but that's, you know, it's kind of taking kind of it. There's a reason behind it. I understand the reasoning behind it. You explained it before anyway, it's pretty good. But there's also, you know, personal freedom, personal property. You have a piece of land, you should be able to mow it if you want to mow it. You know, yeah, it might not slow down the water, and maybe it does slow down the water. But I don't like it because of that.
Does it need to say somewhere in here that existing uses are grandfathered or something? Or is that
Probably
just,
will.
is that gonna, does it say that somewhere else in the town ordinances that these things don't
Not
apply
as,
to?
not as a blanket.
Yeah,
But
it's
it-
not a blanket.
It should state it in there because this, if it does go through, is a lot of taking, in my opinion. You know, there's a
Isn't
lot of.
there an agricultural exception though? Isn't that why they
There
are?
might be.
You're not stopping farmers from.
That's right.
Fields and,
I don't know.
you know, putting down the common or, dumping or whatever.
Yeah,
You have to be able
they
to-
spread down here, right up to the river down there, they, from the Westmoreland Fall and spread.
You gotta realize that that's in there, unless they really feel they want to store any of their animals, that's not gonna hurt.
Well, that's not best management practices, though. It's, if you're doing that, it's not considered best management practices. It's not, you're not helping the environment at all. If you're putting manure right next to the river, you're not helping our water supply. I mean, it's pretty scary.
I understand, that, but that's, you know.
If people do it, I get that people do it, but people shouldn't do it.
State allows it, then you'll never get it.
Yeah.
It's
Come in
legal,
every time.
it's legal.
It is, yeah.
The conservation district is constantly trying to teach people to do better than that. You know, if you know better, we should do better. So,
As I read this, I mean, I like the fact that this prohibits this, but just a matter of. Is this a zoning regulation or is this should be a town regulation? In the sense that this. We're looking at projects that come before your board and the zoning board. We're looking at things that meet the ordinance and not necessarily how business is conducted on that property. Going forward in the future, so something could be approved and then violate this later after it was approved. So that makes me wonder whether this is the appropriate place for this in the zoning or not.
One of those enforceable things, so can we enforce this?
It is enforcement, but all regulations are enforcement after they go through the planning process. I mean, we approve the site plan, but every single thing on there pertains to what you're saying, whether it's wetland related or not.
That's a good point, and I stand corrected.
But if we're taking out 10 because of enforcement, then we should probably take out 11 because of enforcement. If we can't enforce 10, how are we gonna
Oh,
enforce
yeah, I
11?
see what you're saying.
So like, you know, how are we gonna enforce one in the
You're right.
other? I think it maybe belongs somewhere, but
well, I'm thinking like if you're, say, you know, the planning board is looking at a proposed project,
Yeah.
a business or something that's going in and they say they wanna, you know, have landscaping.
They could
Maybe it is
delineate.
the time to tell them, listen, okay, you can landscape over here, but over here you have to leave that a naturally vegetated buffer.
you would delineate on the site plan then,
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe another one for the site plan regs.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying, does it hurt to have it here?
No.
I think you're right.
and in the site plan regs eventually, maybe.
I don't think it hurts, I mean. Be hard to hurt.
I mean, right, you're not gonna be out there telling people how to mow their lawn, that's not the aim of this, the aim of this is.
What it says though.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't-
Well, but we also, like I was saying, we have to decide who this applies to. If it doesn't apply to every single person in town because they're grandfathered, then they need to know that.
I'm thinking of what Mark you told me about what they did in the town's transportation site where they cut down the trees on the bank of one stream, goes to Wilson Pond. That's, you know, that's a vegetative buffer that's preventing runoff into the pond, and yet they cut down the vegetation.
About 50 feet off the road, they literally cut trees down. This was about 2 years ago when they're still trying to sell the property. And maybe they did it to have better visual, you know, vision of the building and all that stuff. And they literally just cut trees and just left them right there. Many of those have floated since into the water. It also allowed for a lot of garbage to flow freely across that parking lot into the garbage, into the stream there. And you know, not to change the subject, but you know, there's a lot of wetlands on that property, and that property has recently been sold. And there's a lot of activity and construction going on. I'm not sure there's permits. There's a lot going on right there, and people should be concerned about it.
So an enforcement issue is still what you're talking about?
Probably enforcement issue.
I think so.
I did make people aware of it at that time. Didn't get traction.
Yeah, well, I think with Adam, I think it's more all under enforcement, maybe site plan regs.
Yeah,
or 11.
let me look at it. I can try to write it in a way that makes.
Okay, so we're still working on number 7.
Got it. Number 11?
I mean, 11.
11.
It might already be captured somewhere in our site plan, like, is what I'm saying. So if it's not, then maybe.
All right.
Yeah.
Brings us to number 12. Prior wetland alterations on a property shall be considered in the review of any further applications submitted pursuant to this section for that property. So again, that's there. I mean, the site plan does, yeah, you're right. We do it anyways, but that says what we already do. Anything is taken into consideration that was done on the property prior to.
When you sell your place, James, it's over. It's going to get converted to wetlands.
Okay.
Just, it's repetitive.
12 is there, 12 stays.
Okay.
Item F, areas exempted from the ordinance. Okay, areas exempted from the ordinance will include wetlands associated with currently functioning and maintained non-abandoned man-made ditches and stormwater treatment swales, sedimentation and or detention basins or ponds, agricultural and irrigation ponds or swales, fire ponds, cisterns, and related facilities. Let's see, in order to be exempt, such features may not have been constructed as part of a compensatory right, mitigation or created in what were previously jurisdictional wetlands. So how is this? Lots of times we have site plans coming in that, I think this one that came in here has their detention pond in the wetland areas there to be built there, so this wouldn't allow that. Or that would be exempt. This is exempting ones that are already there, but it's not exempting ones to be built to put your detention pond
Right, well,
there.
that's not the point of this. I think the point
No.
of this is that we want to avoid. Like what I was mentioning happened on the Weber Hill Road project where they had to come to us and go through this whole rigmarole because of the road ditch.
Yeah.
That shouldn't happen. So
No, I think this is fair, that's fair.
Yeah.
But it does make me wonder about, are we restricting site plans like that? Not to be able to put a detention pond where they need to. on the
does
site?
does this affect that?
Not this one we're reading, I mean, back further. in.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Somewhere in there that we came through there, are we restricting that? Maybe we'll have to look into that. to see.
Yeah.
That is relied upon by a lot of site plans coming in here, and as long as it's done properly, it really isn't hurting, in my opinion. Anyway. So let's keep that in mind, but you're right, it does not pertain to this exemption. So let's see, that was item F. That is staying in unchanged, I think. I think it seems fair. Yep, okay, unchanged. Biggest, let's see, G, yeah. Brings us up to G and.
So G is. You know, might need a bunch of work because. I guess it's gonna depend. How people are gonna apply for permits and, you know, how, you know, is it gonna be a variance, a special exception, how's this gonna work?
So, right, yeah, I think you're right, it does need some work there, reading through it, I'd agree.
Yeah.
And just.
I just want to get something down there and let you guys massage it into something that works.
Just to
And
clear it up a little bit,
does the district need a WCD?
probably, but that's a good point there, yeah. So. If we have an ordinance here that we're doing or part of our ordinance and it is mentioned as a special exception, then that applies with the ZBA. They can grant a special exception. Only what is in there as a special exception, that's in the zoning ordinance as an item. Like we're thinking of something before as an item for a special exception, they can grant that. They can't grant across the board special exception, I don't believe. And a variance would be for something that is not mentioned at all in this ordinance. So we can't by this ordinance say that you have to have a variance or special exception. Well, yeah, we can special exception because we mentioned it, but we can't for a variance because the variance applies to things that aren't allowed.
Right.
So that's how that goes. But yeah, I agree that G does need some more. Need to look at that. And the conservation, yeah, I had a note here, the Conservation Commission reviews and comments on all these site plans anyway. Usually. So
We had something earlier, we were gonna make a special exception.
we did, yeah.
If that was included here in G, and then some of these conditions were part of the conditions for that special exception.
Well, if we write the special exception, it would have to be as it's written in the rest of the ordinance. Let's see, in addition to previous or in the following are special exceptions, and then it added in like that.
And then we listed the conditions of those special exceptions.
However it goes there, yeah, whatever that is, yeah. But you have your own conditions in the ZBA as the special exception, correct, criteria?
But the conference that I went to this last weekend, it seemed to imply that it was helpful to have for special exceptions, when you gave a special exception use, it was helpful to have certain conditions that might relate to those. So for instance, if we're trying to consider a use in a particular place in the district, that place might not be suitable because it might not meet certain conditions, but some other place in the district might. I'm thinking of some of the things that we've had in town here before where the use is permitted by special exception, but it really shouldn't be there where they want to put it. Maybe it should be somewhere else. And if there were conditions for that special exception that were laid out in the ordinance, then that would be the focus of that, rather than having the zoning board come up with the reasons on the fly.
And they may be arbitrary reasons for one person and not the other, or ambiguous to the other person, so.
And so some of the conditions that Sherry's listed here are reasonable conditions for any special exception in the wetlands district.
So that might be the way to address it, yeah, with the special exception and refine your condition.
And it was interesting because some people are used to working with special exceptions where there are no conditions. We just come up with what those special conditions must be when we consider the 4 questions for special exceptions and so on. But if there are certain things that relate to some of those questions in here that we could tie these conditions to, is it hazardous or harmful or cause public welfare to be diminished or whatever. I can forget the exact language, but we could look at those 4 questions and we can relate these conditions to that.
For that particular zone.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
this
not, yeah,
particular zone.
yeah.
There's a chance we could add wetland specific conditions to the actual application for special exception
Mhm.
as well. Or
You could, or leave it like,
leave it
it
anyway.
gives him more leeway, or your board more leeway to decide using those conditions. And then, of course, there are always conditions, site plan through the planning board, and ZBA sometimes puts conditions on it and before it comes to us.
Do we have conditions anywhere else in the ordinance?
Not for special exceptions.
Yeah.
We don't, and that's one of the things I was thinking about, urging you to think about, as you look at revising. Again, based on what I heard at this conference, it was just There's a bunch of lawyers. who were
Yeah.
very muscular.
We were there.
Adam was there.
I was there. Which talk was this? Do you remember? Cause I can go back to the slides and look at it.
I have to go back over the slides, I have my notes, and,
I'll find them. Yeah,
it-
it's a good idea.
It was just, it was sort of an off the cuff suggestion, and I wrote it down with the extra, some of my notes.
I like it in brackets.
It would help in some cases.
Yeah.
If there was something there.
Yeah.
But not, as I see exceptions, I wanna say, this is the use that's allowed. But we have to consider where you wanna put it is appropriate.
Yeah.
That's what a special exception is, and it's appropriate because it answers those 4 questions. But I want all the help I can get to decide where the use should be.
So,
Well, if you have those conditions listed, you're probably gonna get a better proposal.
That's right. People will speak to those conditions in their proposal, it will help.
yeah. Yep.
Okay. That brought us to the end. Let's see, I gotta ask you. Any other business
My head is mush too.
required, any other business? If not, a motion to adjourn would be in order, and Richard just made one, is the second. Seconded by, James not seated on our board. Seconded by Brandon, is there any further discussion?
Well, what's our next step, I guess, is
Wait for me.
wait for you.
Wait for you?
Next-
Oh, and the next step, waiting for you. Next step is.
Next
right,
Tuesday. maybe.
Rewording a bunch of this stuff.
Let's say before the next meeting, I'll have a draft.
Okay.
That may or may not be looked at by our lawyer at that time. So by our next meeting on this. Well, thank you, Mike. There's a possibility for a rough draft on this law. That will hopefully be ready by the packet due date of the day.
Any progress on the conservation commission expense?
What do you guys meet next?
First Monday.
Second person.
Oh, the second, yeah, maybe. Yeah, wait, if I'm not done, I'll send you guys what I have. How about that? Does that work?
You guys have some homework to do too, right? Aren't they gonna add in, I mean, are gonna chime in to what you're doing now,
Mhm.
or no? Yeah. right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you guys are.
We'll talk.
Yes, yeah.
I
Well,
want to thank everybody.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah, thanks
thank
for
you
coming
very
again.
much.
Yeah, we'll have you again.
so I'll try to have something ready for your meeting that you guys can look over for this. meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Does that make sense?
All in favor of adjournment, say aye. Aye.